Monster. Ooh, I like that one today.
That was a good one, Ben. Good intro.
Yeah, I'm happy with that one. Seriously aided by some nice make noise microphone. Being sampled and holded through the zones, so it's not pitch shifting with its delay time. It's pretty cool. Chris and Kim, how are we both? Let's start with Kim. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Ben. All good.
Now, this is...
I've got more of my own modules screwed in my small cases.
Several small cases.
Yeah.
So this is Kim Bjorn from Bukes, Push Turn Move, Patch and Tweak in collaboration with Chris Meyer above, and Pedal Crush in collaboration with Scott from the channel Knobs. Some very lovely pedal and synth and other gear demos, very lovely ambient. It almost feels like the guitar's not there. I forget the guitar is what he's using and just kind of sail into the ambience of what he does. It's great. Of course, above Kim there is Chris Meyer from Learning Modular. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing well. I'm the usual battling technology, but that's what a lot of us have to live with these days.
Yeah.
So, doing great. Like I said, the anticipation of finally getting my Monster system ready to play rather than just work on it.
Damn it, Knobs and Strings in the chat says, damn, I'm having to listen to Ben on the left and Colin on the right again. We don't want me on the left. That was the first stream's issue. Unless you're very specifically panning me around in your own audio environment, which you're totally free to do, of course. But yeah, I'm certainly happy for Colin Bender's beats to soundtrack what we're doing here. So this is episode 4 of Feeding the Monster. The Monster system from ADDAC. Well, the case, the guts of the case was a Monster case from ADDAC system. We spoke about the power, appropriate power supplies, separate supplies for positive and negative voltages, bus bars to distribute across the lib, low impedance bus boards used in the case. We're all right with a couple of power questions still, I think, if a random one comes up, but I would like to send people back to that first episode, skip 9 minutes into the first episode, and we really go over power. We've also been through sound sources, oscillators, wave folders, touched on samplers, and we've got filters covered now as well. And we're heading into modulation, mixing, effects, output stages. But we left on a cliffhanger because a couple of screws fell into the case, so we didn't want to turn it on live. How did that go?
Mixed results and still a little bit of a mystery. To fish out the nuts, I used a bunch of magnets. I keep them in a plastic bag so the magnets don't suddenly detach and go into the case. Mm-hmm. And they're really good at picking up the hex nuts that I use. So I waved this bag around in the bottom of the case and fished out one screw from underneath the -12 power supply. Fortunately, there was enough clearance that it wasn't going to short. But another screw was underneath the bus board, and it could have shorted the bus board out to the frame. So I'm really glad I fished that one out before I turned it on. But then when I turned it on, I heard the -12 supply switch on and off really rapidly. Oh. Almost no LEDs came on, except for the spectral multiband resonator was solid white. So I quickly hit the power and went, okay, what did I screw up?
What was it?
I'm still not entirely sure because I took every module out one at a time and the power connections were correct on every module. There's two things I changed. For one module, its power cable was crimped and caught between the module's panel and the frame. And then for the spectral multiband resonator, I had it taking some power off of +5. And I said, I've had so much extra power on +12 in this case now. I'm going to put the jumper back to that. So I took out the no drain, put the jumper back, so it's no longer taking power from -12, and that was the power supply that was freaking out on me. And then I put modules back one at a time, and everything came up. So either it was the power cable that was caught between a module and the rails, shorting out to the rails, or there's something funky going on with the SMR and using the jumper to take its +5 ultimately off of -12. Nothing visibly smoked. There was a slightly acrid odor when I got into the case, but I'm really thankful that I had high-end power supplies that very quickly shut off power before anybody got fried.
Yeah, good. So we don't have the fried module yet. Schmooster, if you're in the chat room, you may pick up later. If not, was keeping tabs on.
Nothing's fried, but we might give you credit for at least one incorrectly installed module.
Yeah, there's no prizes, so at this point I'm not too fussed.
There's no prizes, only losses.
Yeah, and I don't want you to lose anything. But Schmooster was keeping a tally on anyone that said whether any modules would fry or not. I had said 1, Kim had said 2. Of course, we hope none. But for a bit of fun, if anyone wants to throw in whether you think a module will fry or not today, you're welcome to throw it in the chat. So we should get right in. What would you like to start with?
I'm going to start by installing a couple more utility modules. I do believe in having some multifunction modules because inevitably when you're patching, you go, oh, I wish I had one more. So that's why I like having a lot of distings around. But when there was a Kickstarter a year or two ago, there was this interesting pair of modules called the Nozories from Nozoid, and I picked those up. And if you can put that screen up, I'll change cameras around here and show you what those look like.
Yeah, let me pull across to that. There we go. So there's 2 versions of the Nozori modules, the 68 and the 84, and it's how many sockets or pots is the variation between the 2. I haven't had a chance to dive into these myself, but I did back them when they were on, was it Kickstarter or Indiegogo? I can't remember which.
It was Kickstarter.
Kickstarter, and Kim has them as well.
Yeah, I was going to say you have them, Kim.
I also back them.
These can do lots of different things. There's jumpers on the backs to change behavior and panels that you can just overlay as well. How do you find yourself using them, Kim?
I think they're great. It's the, like you're using the distinct for different purposes. Here, I really like that you have the what do you call it? The plates you can put on, so you don't have to dive into a manual. So I'm using them simply to test out different stuff. Maybe in one case before I go to another case and use a module that does around the same. But also for workshops, and demoing different, how CVs, voltages, behave in certain circumstances. They're really great running through, doing FM stuff, wave shaping, etc. So I use them for stuff that I don't, modules with functionalities that I don't maybe have or have in that combination. There are some oscillator, clusters and things. I think it's a really great initiative when it came out, and I think it's actually today. It's precisely a year ago that he sent out the last modules from the Kickstarter.
Oh, okay. Just to shout out the live chat very briefly before we get in. Kim and I are watching. Chris can't with the setup he's got with the camera, but we can of course be fielding questions to Chris as we go. DB Powland says that Nozori can mean peak info in Japanese, which is interesting. And there's a link in the chat there for the Nozoid, presuming I've said that right, from Kim in the chat. We'll try and everything we're talking about, we'll try and grab modular grid links, Chris's demo videos, my demo videos. And if you're watching this after the actual stream, there is a live chat replay, at least in browser. I'm not sure on mobile to the right. So there's a lot of information, a lot of interesting people in the chat as well if you want to watch that kind of go by. But Chris, let's dive in. I can see it in your hand.
Yeah. Here's what one of them looks like. Throw it up to the camera here. So they usually pretty generic in terms of being a programmable module. They have a few different ins and outs and a few different knobs. And then there's either a series of jumpers on the back here you can set to decide the module's identity, or for a small fee, you can get a little set of dip switches on a companion module that allow you to change the module's personality. And the way to tell what the module's doing is these come up with a bunch of front panels like these that show you the different functions the module has, labels each knob, etc. And there's ADSRs and LFOs and bit crushers and noise sources and wave shapers and Carpless strong algorithms and VCOs and all sorts of stuff. And the idea is when you're using it, you're supposed to just place the panel loosely on top of the module like that. And now you can see every function labeled. I was originally going to put these higher up in my case, but the problem with that is that the panel would fall off. So I ended up choosing a place that is somewhat, it's not quite vertical, it has a slight slope to it here. And I think that's going to allow the panels to stay in place, and we'll find out, won't we?
That's where
But I got two
nollies
of
come in
these.
handy.
Yeah, the 68 and the 88, they trade off how many CV inputs you have versus how many knobs.
When you're using these, Kim, are you just generally laying the panel over the module? Is it not falling off at all? Are your cases at an angle where that's just fine? Just kind of pop the extra
Yeah,
panel
they
over
are
the top?
at an angle where it's fine, but it depends on if I'm traveling with it. I had actually one travel where I forgot the extra faceplates. That
Okay.
was kind of interesting. So I had to go online and check, okay, what am I doing now? But I think it's a really cool thing that people are trying to, create a new utility module in a new way with these faceplates. And I think you can get them in the black version now also.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, everyone must have the black version of everything. That's the admission to the club.
Yeah.
But just to pull them up on the browser again, I do like that it's a multifunction module that you're moving by jumpers, which is maybe less convenient than a rotary dial or a switch on, say, a disting, but there is a lot of I/O and pots and knobs to play with. 6, where you've got 6 ins and a stereo out, and 6 pots, or the 8 pots and knobs, and then 2 in, 2 out. So there's a lot you can do on there. There's some interesting equalizers that I remember, some interesting effects. I'm not sure how kind of lo-fi they were. I don't think it's running any really kind of serious top-end processing for DSP, but there's a lot of interesting modes. Let's just have a scout around the website while Chris is screwing those
There's
in.
also,
and see.
harmonic oscillators and stuff. And I mean, he uses these modulation. You have knobs assigned to modulations once in a while, and they introduce really nice variations to your patches also.
7177 in the chat says anyone that wants to check these out, he believes there's a VCV rack port of them as well. Cheers for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's great. If people can go check these out, then you can decide whether it's handy in hardware or not, or go the kind of Omnicoin route of integrating all the two very nicely. There's some of the modes there.
Yeah, I like the idea of these programmable modules, and something I even have bought but not have had a chance to get into yet is a series of Arduino or Teensy shields that are Eurorack modules, because I want to get into programming my own algorithms. So that's on the thing. And I got the Salt recently from the Bella folks as well, which is a lot more horsepower.
They worked with, is the Rebel Technology that brought that into Eurorack?
They did the Salt with Bella.
Okay.
Or what was it called originally? There was something else.
There was the Owl.
There was another module
from
as well.
Rebel Technology, but the Bella is something else, I think.
Yeah, well, Bella is the one who's making the modules, actually. Owl's maybe what you're thinking about.
Yeah, I think there's some involvement with some Rebel Tech, or maybe they're just using that technology
they did a collaboration.
now. Yeah, that's it. They're still on screen there. I've scrolled down the website. I'll just pull this in again for these modules. To the chat, VCO parametric, modified quantized wave shape, looping VCOs, more complex noise, car plus strong, VCA and panners, pitch shifters, granulators, wave shapers, EQ. There's a whole host of CV generation and manipulation, audio sources, AM phase mode, FM, 8-bit, a tropical mode. I'm not sure what tropical is. Clocked ADSRs.
And tropical is usually entropy or decay, yeah.
LFOs, sequenced LFOs, stereo wave shaping. I remember just thinking it does so much, I'm at least going to find a handful of things I like on both of the modules, and that was the reason I ended up backing that in the end.
Yeah, I got to come up with a place to keep all of these screens that go over it. I maybe have to come up with like a little pocket on the side of the modular so I can switch them out quickly.
Yeah, your really nice wood sides need a shirt pocket.
Yeah, that's the thing. Once you really pimp out your case, you go, but. Maybe something on the front.
Yeah.
Anyway, that more or less finishes that row. So, of course, going to do a smoke test here. And looks good. LEDs blinked on them. And everyone's up. This was a white ring of death on the SMR last time, but everyone's happy. Good.
It's starting to look like a big beauty, the case, as it comes together.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to, tonight, just pour a large margarita, turn off the lights, and just turn the case on and just stare at it for a while.
7177 in the chat mentions again, and these modules are very good. The Starling VIA modules are running the same hardware behind the faceplates, and you can change the firmware again. A similar principle. They do some really cool stuff. Really nice modules. I like the design of those too.
Yeah. So for my next trick, I'm going to start filling up this row. And this is where all my modulators go. It's kind of like an under row, then to feed the modules up above them, modulate the oscillators, the filters, the VCAs. And because I am the way I am, they're more or less thematically grouped. There's kind of a continuum from randomness through LFOs, through function generators like AD stuff, through more complex envelope generators. That's kind of how this row is going to flow across here. And I'm going to pan around a little bit and start filling out the random functions initially here. Let me get you a better pan here to what I'm up to.
Yep.
And one of my favorite random modules is definitely the FrapTools Sapel.
Super underrated. Very, very nice.
It's a really lovely update on the source of uncertainty, the Buchla module, in that it has a lot of additional functionality, lots of nice quantization, lots of nice interaction between the sections. Yeah, this is really quite an amazing module. When I want a smoothly varying random, it's the first thing I go for example.
Very nice. You mentioned for my next trick, if you're the magician, which one of us is the beautiful assistant, and which one of us has to get into the hat? Careful here, careful. There'll be some bruised egos.
Ben, I think you're the one who's going to get stalled in. One thing I'll point out about the FrapTools modules is they're very conscious about the noise that their modules may produce. There's some talk about power, like you got linear power supplies, you don't need the low impedance bus boards. Actually, one of the biggest sources of noise in cases is produced by the modules bleeding into other modules. And FrapTools tends to put a lot of capacitors on their own modules to filter their own power connections just to make sure they're not contributing noise onto the bus.
Yeah, same thing here. I've just found an image of the back of Fumana. Similar thing. Yeah. A real kind of...
Oh, yeah, well, the Fumana's huge.
Yeah, the parts count on that is crazy. There's a stream I'll find and put the link in the live chat with Simone and... I forget the other person that designed a lot of the Fumana as well. Apologies.
Antonio.
Yes, there we go. Said beautifully as well. We did a live stream a while back talking about this, and I absolutely love the Fumana. I think I've crowbarred my love for the Fumana unknowingly into every single one of these streams.
You have.
And most patches at the minute, truth be told.
If you want to see a lot of capacitors, look at the back of their Sapel sequence. Excuse me, their USTA sequencer. I had another module designer ask me, "Are they using capacitors for battery backup? What is this?"
I'm going to see if I can find that one.
Meanwhile, I'll zoom in the camera so people get a better view of what I'm up to here. Sorry for the shaky cam there. There we go.
And Chris mentioned in the live show, you joined me for that Fumana live chat as well.
Yes, I did.
You did.
We had a good time.
Yeah, FrapTools Fumana live chat. This is going back a couple of years now, but still relevant for the module, of course. Is this Sonic Potions you've got in your hand now?
It is Sonic Potions. Are they still alive?
He was Julian, isn't it, from Sonic Potions? He was really lovely when I met him at the first Super Booth, and of course at following Super Booths too. But I've not heard much from them at all. I know Penrose was a good success for them, the quantizer that they built. This is their... I remember him showing me this noise module and showing me how the shapes were like going through the mountains across Switzerland, I think he said.
Yeah, he's using a lot of technology it's very similar to the way that 3D programs generate artificial landscapes, creating fractal noise and what are called chords of noise, adding randomized elements at basically octave doubled intervals to create more and more complex shapes. And that's the basis of this in terms of being able to having array control, changing how rough the randomness is. So you can go from audible noise to a slowly varying signal. And I just love it. It's just a great little module. He was working on a bigger version of this, and it hasn't seen the light of day yet. I was holding out for that, but now I just got the little Model 2 to take its place.
Yeah.
Is this one of the modules you'd like to have in your live case too?
Good
Seems
question.
very immediate.
I mean, I wish my live case, was like the TARDIS and just had more room. Because I'd love to have more randomized sources in there. I'm mainly using Marbles for that right now, but I don't have room. So I'm kind of, Marbles is a good multifunction module that I'm taking advantage of. But in terms of my big case where I want to have a lot of modulation going on, it's definitely one of my favorite for random sources. And that's why it's sitting right next to Sapel.
Great.
Couple of questions from the live chat. Chris, did you choose, if you had to choose between Marbles from Mutable Instrument and Sapel from Frap Tools, what would you go for and why? We can see both in shot for anyone that hasn't noticed. Marbles is in the row below.
Yeah, it depends on what the purpose of the case was. Because Marbles can also create trigger chains that are rhythms. Sapel Cam is mainly just randomized. It's not all that useful, where you can actually get rhythm programming, even simple kick snare patterns out of Marbles.
Yeah.
So Marbles combining those patterns with step random voltages and having a smooth random makes it fantastic for something like my percussion case, and I have a small version of it in my gigging case.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if I was building primarily a drone case or just trying to modulate stuff, I might go for Sapel because it's a little bit more, well, they both have their strengths and weaknesses. I like Sapel's random source, but Ben, you can weigh in on that as well.
Same answer. What Chris said. No, Marbles feels like it's a really, really comprehensive version of kind of every random out there. It does the locked looping like a Turing machine. You can bias your way through the kind of distribution curve like a source of uncertainty from Buchla. The clocking side can be probability based, like branches, like a coin toss. Will it be kind of heads or tails? There's random gates, which are more similar to Sapel, but then there's kind of beat, kick, snare type pattern programming as well. You can lock and loop either side, CV or gates. Sapel feels more kind of traditional, almost feels more random. I think you instantly get more, quote, musical out of Marbles.
Yeah, I was thinking about the answer while you were talking. I guess if I was trying to make a small case and I was using this module to generate music, rhythmic patterns or note patterns, then definitely Marbles. If I have a big case like this one and I'm looking for a module to produce random voltages, then Sapel's a good choice.
Yep. One quick question just to overview for anyone that did miss it. Knobs and Strings asked, and actually said maybe I did miss it and I referred him back to episode 1, but how does clocking work in this monster? Can we have a really super quick overview of that bottom left section maybe?
Yeah, let me pan the camera down to this section. I have a big variety of things going on down here, including a CV MIDI interface. The Expert Sleepers FH1 is going to be a FH2 here soon. Going to a keyboard that has an arpeggiator. But it's mainly a mixture of different things. In this case, the vector sequencer from 512 is probably going to be my master. But then around it is the WD Architect arpeggiator, Marbles, 4MS quad clock distributors with their expander, grids, STG switch. I'm either going to clock Rene from the 512, or what I really want to experiment with is clocking Rene from grids using different patterns to drive its X and Y steps. So for this case, I am imagining I'm going to be composing sequences on the 512, then adding parts to it, so it's going to be the master in this system. In my gigging case, Pamela's New Workout is the master for different reasons, mainly because that's a very percussion-oriented case, where this one's more note-oriented.
Yep, there we go. But
So, Chris, have you ever been tempted to use the tempi for clogging the Rene? Just asking.
Tempi is very cool. I have played with some people who use tempi as their main clock driver in their systems. I did not personally gel with tempi when I tried to use it, and that's kind of like my criteria for a module. Is it something that makes me smile or makes me frown when I try to use it? And I just didn't gel with its UI, but that's just me. I know a lot of people who use tempi as their main thing. I'm more of a Pamela's New Workout person than a tempi person, personally.
Just to keep the chats coming, no CV to MIDI. For shame, Constantine says. He's a big fan of CV to MIDI, and I know kind of consulted and worked with Bafako on bringing the VCMC to life and other modules as well.
Yeah, I do have in the closet my Prophet VS and a Roland JD800. My studio is kind of physically too small to bring them out, but when I got back into doing music again, I wanted my focus to be modular because I wanted to see how far I could push it. So I was purposely leaving MIDI devices out of here because I wanted to push myself to see how far I could get with the modular. And I used to be a real Ableton Live jockey, and I think that's going to be my next step, is combining live with the system. You know, down the road, I might get something like a Hydra, things like that, and start driving that from here as well. But right now, I'm modular focused, and the next I'm going to be live plus modular focused.
Yep.
Teach their own. The next one in this row, Felistre. Another lovely takeoff on a booklet module, dual function generator, but with a lot of stuff added in. It's kind of like a dual universal slope generator from Surge, except for its main sections are not slews, they're actual attack decays. Very unusual about this device is that they do the wave shaping of the attack decay after they've actually been generated. Others put it into a feedback path, so whenever you change the shape, you change the timing of that segment as well.
Yep.
But in the case of Felistre, they do wave shaping after attack decay, so you can change the shape without changing your envelope time. Great if you're using it as an LFO or a VCO as well. But then they've also added all these sections. They've got a 4-quadrant multiplier down here. They've got a linear slew down here. They've got a couple flip-flops to do clock divides for octave, sub-octave generation. Lots of cross-patching between the two sections to do quadrature. This is just an extremely flexible, dual function generator. So this is like a utility as well as a couple envelopes. And it's near the VCOs because I like to pluck things on my VCOs. I like to pluck wave folders with quick attack decays. I like to pluck my FM def. So that's why this is positioned underneath the VCOs.
Mm-hmm. And again, just keep the live chat shouting out. Do keep questions coming. For Kim and I, we'll keep dropping links and passing them on or responding ourselves. Dynamis Studio, I've got to know Felistre versus Maths. Would love to hear your thoughts on those.
Oh, boy.
You've got to have a Maths, but yet you don't have a Maths in the case. Do you have a Maths in the case, Kim, at the minute?
Definitely. I even have the random source dual universal slope generator too.
Okay. I think you have to have those functions. I would argue more strongly than it having to be Maths that you should have function generators. It really is a core function of what modular is.
Yeah.
But specifically to that question...
Maths is very cool.
Yeah.
I think what sets Maths apart from most universal slope generators is that it's also that CV mixer as well.
Yeah. 2 times gain on all 4
I
ends.
personally prefer the Bafako Rampage over Maths myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I don't have a Maths is I have lots of other modules to do what Maths do. I even have a couple of ancient 1970s Dennis control voltage processors, CVP1s, that are like Maths granddaddy, prehistoric Maths.
Yeah.
So I already had a lot of things that did those functions. That's why I never personally got a Maths. But that's not because I'm anti-Math. I think it's a great utility module to have in your system.
Yep. I would agree. Absolutely. All 4 inputs have 2 times gain or 2 times inverted gain. There's the logic outs, the end of outs as well, which is super useful. You can turn it into all sorts of things like you can any function generator really, but Maths is certainly very well thought out and worthy of its place and reputation.
Yeah.
I mentioned, because Constantine's in the chat, the special reserve version of single malt synthesis, and I was looking forward to joining Heimbach and Constantine for that next week. Someone's asked what dates that is. At bit.ly/Corona Streams, I am keeping a streaming resource updated near enough daily as I get updates and try and take the old streams off and put new ones on. Please do share that and keep that growing. It's turned into a really nice resource for everybody. But in lieu of Superbooth, 22nd to 24th is a special reserve stream with Heimbach, Constantine and myself. I'll be joining for most of that, if not all of that. They've invited me on, which is very nice. With the idea of recreating the vibe of Superbooth. Short 20-minute segments, thereabouts, with lots of different small boutique companies, almost like how you walk around Superbooth and all bump into each other and quickly check things out. As well as that, Superbooth officially have some content on the 23rd, at superbooth.com. There's no other info yet other than it will be on superbooth.com. And 24th to 26th is Q Sonic States, kind of online event again in lieu of Superbooth. Slightly different vibe to the Heimbach one, but there we go. So back to the case. What's next?
Yeah, I realized I put Flistry in too early. I was a little too excited about my Frap Tools fanboyism here.
That's fine.
Because I have more random sources here. A really common random source is one based around a classic chaos theory equation called the double well problem, where you have, instead of orbiting around one sun, basically you have two suns to orbit around, and you go between one, then to the other one, then back to the first one, back to the second one, and that's what the double well chaos unit is. And Ian Fritz designed a module that's available from LB and a bunch of other people called the Chakwa. It's a quadrature sine oscillator and a double well chaos function. I personally find it not different enough from an LFO, so I've been looking for higher orders or degrees of complexity of chaos, and Ian Fritz has made a couple different ones. He's made Chaotica. Neither Chakwa or Chaotica will fit in this case because they're both very deep, and I've got this power supply right in the way. So I end up getting the nonlinear circuits build of his third one, the Hypester, which is another order of randomness above Chaotica and the Chakwa.
Okay. I'm scouring
He has some
modular
good
grid.
parameters like wild or mild, curly or squirrely, all these really precisely named parameters. But it's also a nice modern surface mount build.
Okay.
So it's skippable.
Which what's the name of that one again, Chris? Sorry.
Hypster, Hypster, the Hypster.
And you got the cool black panel.
Or hipster or whatever. Yeah, I got this directly from Andrew in Australia.
I've put the link in the chat.
It was a B stock. See, now I joke about people get black panels. He had a B stock panel or a normal silver panel, and I thought the black panel looked so cool. I said, I'll take the B stock. I don't care if it's got scratches or whatever. It's just too cool looking.
Yeah. I see Kim beat me to it. Way quicker than me.
That must have been the first time.
Matt Hodson arrived as if by magic. As we talk about maths, here he appears. Good to see you, Matt.
They hear them. They have these Google alerts being sent to them whenever it comes up.
There'll be some performance video from Matt Hodson this coming week, potentially with Superbooth, and I'm sure plenty of his own content as well. So it's worth following the maths with a double T, MATTHS channel for updates on that one.
Cool.
And I guess it's worth mentioning, Ben, your isolation live stream overview. I'll just post the link to it because there's a lot of streams tonight after this one.
There is. I mentioned some of what's coming next week, and I have put the link in the chat. I'll keep doing so, and Kim as well. But yeah, the isolation streams link, the various synth societies across the States, United States, are doing a whole 2-day thing, which I think you can jump straight into after we finish today. There's 7 streams today.
Yeah.
Similar amount.
There's no need to sleep.
No, of course not. Because there's also multiple streams tomorrow. And tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. PDT, which is 7 p.m. UK. Or 11 a.m., sorry, not 11:30. 7 p.m. UK. And we're going to join a panel talking about from Eurorack to mixing environment, which will tail off nicely kind of where we end actually today.
Yeah.
And you're doing what seemed to me like condensing 12 hours of this, Chris, into an hour panel with them as well, Sunday evening.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about how to think about designing a large case from the ground up. So she's going to have Travarsi, one of my heroes, is going to have her case builder on, talking about the custom case being built for her. And I'm going to be talking about this system, and hopefully by tomorrow evening, I'll have it all powered up and maybe even making a little bit of noise tomorrow evening. But we're going to make a lot more noise with this case in a couple of weeks, actually.
Yeah, we will. This was going to be the last of the Feeding the Monster streams, but we all realised, and several people commented, we need to hear this thing. Of course, we can't patch a half-done case, and that's the point of these streams, to share the experiences we get through filling the thing. So in around 2 weeks, we'll let Superbooth all kind of go next week, and probably on the 2nd of May we're looking at, we'll be certain to announce that everywhere across social channels. Some patches, kind of a Feeding the Monster patch example show. So, on to LFOs.
Yep, I have my random section in. So next is kind of going over to my LFO section. And I kept looking for what was a good digital LFO because I wanted alternate wave shapes, something beyond the sine, triangle, square, saw you get out of analog LFOs. And I had a Kermit for a while. I had a Mark II. Now, Ben and I were just talking about the Mark III before we came on. That's a cool device. And there's a couple other good ones out there. But after looking a lot, I really fell in love with the Studio Electronics SD16. And this is actually Mark at EOWave. This is an evolution of a module he did. Both sides act like an analog LFO. They're very easy to control in terms of speed, but they have a wave selection where he's actually printed the waveforms on the front panel so you can see what you're going in between. One of my problems with Kermit Mark II is you never knew where the waveforms were or what they are without referring to a chart. You can trigger these LFOs as one-shot envelopes or have them consistently repeat, so you can use it as an impulse generator. And the two sides can cross-modulate each other as well to create even more complex shapes. So for me, this had a lot packed into a relatively small module, and it's a dual. So I've been very happy with this. It's even a little bit of an envelope generator.
Paul Tass, hey Paul, from Error Instruments, asks, why do you need so many trigger sequencer modules? We could add that question and replace trigger sequence with any given function. This is the monster case, but yeah, go on, Chris. I'll let you field that. Why so many trigger or sequence?
Because I wish I was an entire gamelan orchestra all by myself. But also it's variety. I wanted to have different ways of generating triggers. I mean, you think this is bad, you should see my gigging case. So that I could get different flavors. I could get pre-programmed stuff out of the vector. I could get some of the chance-based stuff out of marbles. Grids is a more controllable chance-based stuff where I've got much more control over the density. I can do divisions. I've got sample and holds nearby. The idea was just to have a variety of different ways. So when I'm working on a composition, I can say, hey, I want this to be steady, or I want this to be very broken up, or I might be stuck and I need to try a fresh idea. The idea of the monster case is to be that idea generator that I don't get frustrated with. But instead, it will enable me to try all these ideas out.
And it's also about having the options, right, Chris? And know where to reach for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I may feel like a Euclidean pattern. I may feel like a drummer pattern. I may feel like, a Tangerine Dream type of ratcheting thing. I want to have it here already in the case.
But I'm curious about, both you, Chris, but also you, Ben. How much do you fancy, creating your own LFO shapes by mixing and etc.?
All the time.
More regular LFO shapes, because you can have everything. We get modules that are more advanced in regards to shapes, right?
Yeah, I'll let you grab that one, Chris. I want to grab a link while we do that.
Right.
That's a beautiful lead into the next module I was going to talk about.
That's how I do it.
I like working with a Vijay at ADDAC, small little company, Eastern Europe, makes really inexpensive modules with some interesting ideas. And he's been working on a line of LFOs lately, and let me grab this other one here, that have a ways of either combining multiple LFOs together to create a complex LFO shape, or chops up the waveforms in interesting ways. Here's a pair of them. One is the harmonic LFO, where you have multiple sine waves, then you can add in as if it's an additive synthesis machine, but create a more complex shape as a result. And there's some jumpers on it in terms of what harmonics are being used, what their phase relationship is, things like that. So that's one approach to that idea. And then he has this other one that I kind of consulted a little bit with him called the uncertainty LFO, where he's taking a couple different LFOs internally that splice into each other to create complex shapes or discontinuities. So there's a couple modules available, and these are really inexpensive from LOTS, that will do that, combine multiple LFOs for you. But yes, of course, you can go ahead and take just your modules or a slowed down VCO, particularly a wavetable VCO, and go ahead and create complex LFO shapes that way. And Dan Walbeck of
DPW.
Dan Walbeck Designs, yeah. He was on last time, and we were talking a little bit about his zero module and things like that as interesting ways of combining multiple LFOs to pick them up when their levels are the same to create a continuous shape that's spliced together out of a couple different LFOs. and he's going to send me that module to play with. So there will be a video on that in the future as well.
Can't have too many VCAs, as has been said in the chat. Can't have too many mixers. Mixers everywhere. As of my patch examples in Patch and Tweak, actually. But a bit of rather shameless self-promo, and apologies that you can't get an Oct at the minute. Stock is being worked on for those that are curious. We had some quite serious delays that a few weeks out we should have Oct widely available everywhere for a long time. But by patching feedback on an LFO. Now, of course, try this on Oct as I have done here. This is a screenshot from the video, which I will just drop a link into the chat. And that is at around 4 minutes into the video, if someone wants to skip in and check this out. But by feeding one of the outputs back into CV control the rate, these are all triangles, 8 triangle outputs on Oct. You get all these kind of, the top wave shape there on the left-hand data is this kind of weirdly skewed pulse-ish wave. We've then got like a stair-step sample and hold on the next trace down, almost looks like a pyramid, kind of stepping up the triangle, ramp-like waves, exponential curves, logarithmic curves, and that's all simply by taking an output back into the CV of its rate. And you could do that on, well, any LFO that has multiple outputs and a CV over rate. Feed it back into itself. You could feed it back into itself through a VCA, so you've got dynamic feedback where you can use something else, maybe pressure on a keyboard, a mod wheel, another LFO if you really want to get into modulating modulation. I really like working that way. Multiple simple sources that kind of chain reaction down through a patch. It's like using, and it needs a lot of modules, but it's very modular in kind of workflow, using lots of dividers and logic to build up beats and rhythms. You could of course just take a sequencer and build a more complex rhythm, but it's kind of fun to have modules react and kind of play downstream in a wider patch.
And it's a great learning exercise also if people are new to modular, right? You know, combining stuff to make your own shapes.
Yeah, people talk about sequencers, sequencing sequencers, also modulators, modulating modulators is another fun technique to play. And again, that's why I got the ST16, is they could do a little bit of that internally, as can the Kermit. But yeah, Oct is a whole nother fun little box.
I was told very specifically, I saw it was in the chat, Dark Sparkler, Kyle Swisher, if you're still there, hello Kyle, that I have to really run my mouth off that you don't have an Oct in that case. I did.
Can't get them.
Well, there's that. We did, they're coming. I'm not really going to run my mouth off about Oct. What would make me very happy, of course, is for Oct to continue being successful, but for people to try these ideas. That really is at the core of what I do and why I started making videos. And I'm confident I can say the same for Chris, that although we often demo specific modules, and we want those makers to be successful and modules to keep coming out, and for those ideas to be supported, I'm very happy if someone just comments saying, I tried that thing you did with this brand's module and it works really well with this other thing that I've got. If we're learning synthesis and sharing, then that's really at the core of what I want to do.
Yeah, it's all about inspiration also.
Yeah, because it is modular. You can patch together a lot of these things that modules do, or a module may be part of the puzzle, or have a piece of the module that you can add to another module. Yeah, so it's about techniques.
David Powland says he'll rent his Oct out. Name your price, David.
There you go.
I'd go for it.
So I'm going to try power now for a very particular reason. The Frap Tools modules have a lovely design with all those capacitors on the back, but those require more current when you start up. And it was the Frap modules that brought down the previous version of this case. As soon as I installed them, that was put the power supplies over the limit to powering up. So I'm curious to see whether or not this new power supply powers up with the Frap modules. I've not tested this yet.
Okay.
Where's the switch? Oh, it came up. Yes, there is. Yes, I'm feeling much better about this now.
Okay.
There's something to be said for having 17 amps of power on the plus 12.
Yeah, big amount of power. You were mentioning, interestingly, those Acroprian power supplies, they're only 50% efficient too, did you say?
All linear supplies are more or less 50% efficient, and actually Acroprian, there's no R in there.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. It's a kind of a cool word, Acroprian. I'm going to use that for a song title. But their output rating, 17 amps, that's what they output. But it means on the input side, they need twice as much power on the inside because half of it's going to heat. And that's why I'm worried about passive ventilation and fans in this case. But when people ask, oh my God, you must be blowing circuit breakers all the time. That's 17 times 2, 34 amps of plus 12. With 120 volt mains, you divide that by 10, and then it's 3.5 amps. And that's nothing on the 15 and 20 amp circuit breakers I have in this house.
Constantine says, weird he doesn't see any Mungo stuff. I don't see many of it around anywhere, truth be told.
I can't own every module.
Yeah, this is a monster case, which, true in descriptive sense and real sense in it, is a monster case by name, by ADDAC system. But it's still an instrument. It's still all within arm's reach. It's not a huge bookshelf type setup that you do see around there. I mean, it's big, and don't get me wrong, it's way bigger than most, but it's not monstrous like some of them that we've seen.
It's not Martin Gore type size.
No. And this is about it being within your arm's reach and being an instrument still, not a wider collection.
Because that's the big thing for me is the ergonomics of this case. I'll go ahead and go to a slightly wider view. And I've mentioned this before. One of the things that drew me to the ADDAC frame is that it does fit the curve of the arm very nicely in terms of reaching the modules. When I'm standing, I'm actually looking at the very top of it, but when I'm on a stool, it's laid out very lovely. It's a little over 3 feet. It's 1 meter wide. That's easily within my arm span. People have asked, why don't I have 2 monster cases? Well, 1, I don't have the room. 2, I need to make a lot more money to put modules into it. But this is, I'm trying to make my personal orchestra. That's exactly what this is about.
Yep. Yeah, thinking of Mungo specifically, though, they're not widely available everywhere. I don't know if there were issues with them before, going back years ago. I've certainly not heard anything of them for a while, but they do look very powerful. I'd certainly be curious to check some out.
The one I've been interested in checking out is, if I remember correctly, they have a voltage control delay. They can go down to really, really short delay times. And that looked like it was very interesting for doing CarPlus strong or other physical modeling type of synthesis. And I was intrigued by that idea.
Yep. Cool. So what's next?
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
So I kind of morphed in this case from random through LFOs through function generators. So the next thing, which goes somewhat central in the case, is one freaking huge function generator.
8 of them.
The radar, the attack, decay, or ADDAR module. 8 of them inside one module. It is very large. But there's voltage control over the times. You have lots of controls over the curves as well as the times. If you have the blip expander, then you can start linking these sections together in all sorts of interesting generative ways. It has quadrature and octature modes to where they automatically create crossfading LFOs among itself. This just basically is like, I need to pluck something. This is the first module I reach for because it also has that shape control and allows me to dial in just the feel I want on the shape of the release or something like that.
How do you feel about the size of those knobs? Are they comfortable?
The knobs are comfortable. They're a little tight vertically, but there's lots of space horizontally, so it's not too bad to get into. So you see he's left lots of space between the rows here, even if there's not space this direction.
Yeah.
So I still find it very easy to control because I can just get in and do an easy quarter turn there without bumping into the next knob above or below it.
Yeah.
One curious thing about the radar, there are some power supplies, and I happen to own 2 of them, where it will not power up. It's very sensitive to when the plus 12 comes up compared to when the minus 12 comes up.
Okay.
He's made a little jumper board that delays one power line in relation to the other to cure that problem for some power supplies, and I was having this problem as well. WMD also makes a similar module called the soft start module, which delays the other leg in relation to this. So people who have microprocessor-based modules that are not booting up in certain cases, you either want to get a WMD soft start and or the erogenous tones delay unit, and that will probably cure your problem of your digital module not booting up in your case.
Yeah, I think when Dortfer moved to their PSU3 power supply, there were some digital modules that had those issues. I think audio damage were one of them. And this WMD soft start, I remember, followed not very long after that to kind of get that issue of, as you say, when certain lines power up. Is that an issue you've ever had, Kim? Things not coming on because of that when certain rails
Not really,
coming up?
no. But I can be too, stressed out to not, notice. You never know.
I end up having to
I
flick
have a little tool case of things like the soft start module and the erogenous tones one, and little jumpers and filters and no drains. Just that's my okay. It's not working. Let's start throwing stuff at it case to work around these little problems.
Question from Dave Peachy: would it be a good idea to position the radar next to the VC8, notwithstanding your whole case layout paradigm?
He certainly designed it that way, and what would be even better is to put a radar next to a levitate, which oddly enough is going in next, to give yourself attenuators, and then go into a module such as the levitate.
Yeah.
And he did arrange his modules, erogenous tones, to have a flow of 8 channels from module to module to module. But in my case, I'm not using just 8 ADs to control 8 VCAs. Actually, I prefer running ADSRs to VCAs and running AD or an AR to a VCA, than using these for more plucking other parameters of modules.
Yep. Nicholas in the chat said, have you needed to buy more patch cables for this monster? And if so, what? Well, not if so, but what kind of modules, cables, do you prefer?
I do have a couple hundred cables and more in the closet. Cables are, they're a personal choice. People like them to all be pink or for them to all glow in the dark. Some people like all the nylon wrapped. Some people like very thin ones. My personal taste, I really like the feel and the size and the pliability of the black market modular cables. They don't kink. They're not too big, but they still have a 26 gauge conductor in them like most other cables. They drape nicely. So that's my main cable. The hoses aren't too bad either. And then when I need to split cables, I'm really fond of the Luigi's Modular Doppio cables. I just had one here, actually. This so far has been my favorite and most reliable way to split one signal into 2. I do have some stackables as well. Stackables are cool, but I've had 1 or 2 fail on me, and this has not failed on me yet.
Yeah, I've had a few stackables fail and other variants in the past. Okay, what's next? The levitate?
Well, I was mentioning, now I need to have a utility mixer right here in the middle. We mentioned not having enough mixers, and I kind of lined up in the middle of this case mixers to act as grand central stations when I need to combine signals or attenuate them. So I've got the low gain submix, which is a great audio mixer, here in the middle by all the VCFs and the VCOs. And then in the middle of my modulation row, I have an erogenous tones levitate because there's 8 attenuators, 4 of them can be inverted, and very important to me, it can amplify a signal by up to ×2. So if I have a signal that's too soft, or if I want to purposely overdrive something, I've got additional gain. Most utility mixers don't add gain. So that's one of the reasons that I'm particularly in love with the levitate.
Yep.
And I have one in my gigging case, and I have one in here.
Mm-hmm. I've pulled up the modular grid again, kind of zoomed in. I would have to hit Command and minus on the Mac to zoom the browser out, fit the whole thing in. The link is in the live chat. We're periodically dropping this modular grid link in. People can see what's to come. The levitate seems to just add so much in having 8 channels in not that much space relative to other utilities that do similar things. It's not one that I've tried yet, but it really is that gain, as you say, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, in my big case here, I have one of my threaded strips here is cut to a shorter piece and has some play. So it's like one giant sliding nut. I'm just lining it up with the holes right now in the levitate. In this case, I have levitate just as a free agent to process stuff in the middle of this modulation section. In my gigging case, I actually have 7 of the channels dedicated, taking outputs from Marbles and outputs from Pamela's new workout, and feeding to attenuators, which those modules lack. They don't have output attenuators, so that I can dial in modulation depths. So I have a Marbles and Pamela coming into my Levitate in my gigging case, and now on those 7 connections, I have those signals with an attenuator right next to it. And that's made it very fast to use in live performance to dial in the modulation depth I need, or to plug into a different modulation source, almost like a mini patch bay right there.
Yep. The Menke DLPG. People have just seen that on the modular grid. Better than a blind panel, Ian says. Much better than a blind panel, I would argue.
Yes.
Dual passive low pass gate.
Yep. There's a number of modules, and I showed the Future Sound Systems VAC1 Polka,
Yeah.
passive optically coupled amplifiers. And this is another take where it has Vactrals. Ooh, magic part, Vactral, in the middle of it. But the main reason it's here is I had some space, and I wanted some VCAs in the middle of my modulation grid, so that I could have one modulator control the depth of another modulator. I have a bunch of VCAs up over there in that corner, and another big cabinet up there. But just to make it easier to patch the system, I wanted VCAs right in the middle of my modulation array, so that I could have one of my modulators modulate the depth of another modulator.
Yep. Just to quickly get the chat, Ed Random says Pamela has onboard attenuation. It does, and you can assign one of the CVs to attenuation as well. So you can kind of VCA Pamela internally, which is cool. Only with a couple of ins, mind. They're not a VCA on every single channel. But interesting.
Yeah, but then you've got to go menu diving on that encoder, and in the middle of a gig, I'm sorry, I just would rather throw in a cable and turn a knob rather than press encoder, rotate, press encoder, rotate. You know?
Yeah, exactly. You'd set that state up before.
Studio situation, that's different.
Yeah, of course. So do you find that you say modulating the depth of a modulator with another modulator, back to our modulated modulation and being dynamic in our patching, do you find you prefer the response of Vactrals to do that? Or is it just handy that that's what you had and it's 2 HP? If you had a 2 HP VCA, would you use that instead for maybe a more accurate response?
Yes, I would, because Vactrals do have compromises with them. They do knock some of the voltage off, and they are non-linear. So it's actually a compromise to use a Vactral-based VCA. It's just that I had a space here, so that's what went into that space. Up in that corner, I have another full-function Happy Nerding 3X VCA as well.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just throwing a utility here in the middle. Vactrals will change things, however, and I'd rather have a full-feature VCA that allowed me to change the curve, set a bias level, in addition to being able voltage controlled. So this is a compromise. This is not my favorite module for doing it, but great place to have a spare ready to go.
Yep. Yeah, and it's nice to see, again, back to this, can't have too many VCAs, can't have too many mixers. You have both next to the modulation and have both next to the audio sources. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, because something that came up in the very first episode, I believe, was cable management on a big system. And a lot of my cable management in the system is just the layout. You know, what's going to flow into what? What do I need to have near something I'm anticipating what I'm going to need in a patch? And it's just the layout is a lot of my cable management in the system.
Yep.
Any other questions, or should we move on?
No, Kim's asked in the chat, how do people cable manage? And we'll wait for some answers to come through on that one.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah, let's keep going.
So we're kind of transitioning now into envelope generators, although there's still, you know, any envelope generator you can loop as an LFO as well. And this is one of my favorite modules in the whole world, the Chaos' ADDAR.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's a quad module in a small space. That alone's very nice. But it has very, very complex envelope or LFO shapes, much more complex than you see in pretty much any other module, unless you have like a control forge or something like that. And it's 260 presets, and they can save presets of how those 4 channels are configured. So I like this to create much more complex modulations instead of just an AD pluck. I might use it to create something that has a lot more warble or wobble to it because of the shape I chose. And the fact that this has presets actually has made it a welcome guest in my live case. I have one in there as well. Because when I go to a song that wants a different set of complex modulations, I can call up a different preset and have all of that, including programmable voltage level, switch over immediately in the live case. And I've added the NIN expander to it, so it's easier to fire the envelopes and test it and get some more CV into it as well.
Yep.
So the expander, it has 4 CV inputs?
Yep.
Is that it?
4 more assignable inputs. So just like there's an assign row already in the stock Zadar, this adds in a second assignable CV per channel inside the Zadar.
Yeah. So I'm
But
curious,
yeah,
do you have
go
it
ahead.
in your travel case too?
Yes, I have one of these in the travel case as well.
Yeah.
Part of it in the travel case was pushing myself to make more complex sounds. I had IntelliGel Quadra in there, which is a very fine, fast to use module.
Yeah.
But I was just getting simple AD plucks out of everything. And I said, look, if I'm on this mission to make more complex, more nuanced sounds, I put the Zadar in its place, in addition to the Cosmotronic Delta V, which is a pair of simple A to Ds and VCAs, just to push myself to have more complex modulation shapes. So for beginners who ask, what modules should I get? I'd start with like a dual function generator or ADSR, but then I would make the next envelope generator / LFO you got, because now it'll take you to the next level of complexity.
Yep.
Yeah. Is it also to get more organic sounding patches, or how is that? Because in your drum voices, you try that, I guess.
Yeah, some of the patterns in here are decidedly non-organic, very switched, steppy sort of stuff. But there are a lot of interesting bouncing ball, warbles, interesting shapes that do give something a more complex life. For example, I was asked for one song with the Meridian Alpha, the ensemble I play with Jim Coker, to create the sound of a chain dragging. And a chain has all these individual links to it. So if you drop a chain onto a metal surface, you're not going to get one sound. You're not going to get an attack decay. You're going to get all these different rattles going on. So by using Zadar, I could pull up a shape that had all sorts of different zigzags to the envelope to simulate that sound.
Yeah. It's almost similar to how if you're trying to, say, synthesize a clap sound, running pink noise through a VCA with a nice decaying envelope is a really common, very simple electronic percussion synthesis method. That always sounds more snare-like. There's a single impact where, like, a stick hits a drum, the noise just decays. Now, a clap is usually modelled on multiple people clapping. Think those big flams in, like, Queen's We Will Rock You, stamping on wooden crates and all clapping, all those slight timing variances. And you look at some of the classic claps in 808s and 909s, and it's multiple transients. So it's actually like several little spikes, 3 or 4 sometimes, before the actual decay. If you stretch that sample out, you actually hear the kind of through the sound, as opposed to just a single impact. So
it's a bit like horn blips, I guess.
Yeah,
a little bit. Yeah.
So using Zadar or a burst generator to re-trigger a fast decaying envelope is a really nice way to then get that clap sound. And musically, if you can pull that clap sound back so that kind of plays into the beat, kind of pushes into the downbeat that you want it on, it's a very musical thing to do when you're synthesizing and making beats in a modular.
Yeah, and putting it in front really helps drive the piece as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's massive. Looking at how electronic beats are made, even very simple 4-to-the-floor dance grooves, the tiny micro placements of all those things make a huge difference. Just to shout out tendrils, cables, as Matt Hodson, Maths, mentions that in the live chat. I know you use those in your live system as well, Chris, as do I. Have you tried tendrils, Kim?
Nope. Yo, wait a minute. I got some.
You just got some, didn't you?
Yeah, I got some, but I've used them much yet. But they're really nice. I think they were nicer than I thought.
Yeah, especially when you lay the case out with those in mind. I think it can make a huge difference to how playable a system is.
You were talking about the Lamont cases with that little row down the middle you could tuck stuff into. That's very friendly for that sort of routing.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, tendrils are a big part of my gigging case because I have a certain amount of patching, 50 cables worth, that is the same from gig to gig in terms of distributing clocks, distributing modulation, like just from Marbles and Pamela into my Levitate. my effects routing chain that I'm going to patch pretty much the same every gig. So rather than patching 50 things from scratch every time I arrive at a gig, I've got them pre-patched with tendrils, laid nice and flat in the case. I can close the lid, get to a gig, open up, and I'm literally ready to just start up grids and start going, trigger, let's go.
Yeah.
And that's much faster, more immediate.
Yeah. Okay, so what is next, Chris?
You'll laugh at this one. I've not used this module yet. I bought it while the case was being constructed. Actually, I traded for it. And that's mutable instrument stages.
Ooh, get ready for a marathon feature length on that, Chris. There's a video on my channel. Stages, you'll be running straight away with the concepts, of course, but stages is very nice.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it, the ability to set how many, group together how many stages to create more complex shapes. And you'll hear more complex shapes are a theme of this particular case, or to be a few different LFOs, et cetera, et cetera. So it just seemed like it was very flexible and maybe a worthwhile addition to this case. So I bought this while the case was disassembled. This, I'm looking forward to playing with it.
Yep, absolutely. Have you played with the stages, Kim?
No, only in VCV-Rack a bit. It's funny, I've read some comments that some people find it confusing. I actually think, as usual with mutable instruments modules, that it's very logical. And I like it a lot when I use it in VCV-Rack, I must admit.
It's kind of the most modular module, in a way, how it really is. Emily broke out this concept of what is a stage, what is an event, what is an LFO, what is a sequence. Yeah. What is this, a held voltage? Is it rising to something? Is it falling to something? Is it waiting to be told to do that? Is it doing it on its own? So there's a little bit of setting up. I think once you kind of crack the code, which hopefully doesn't take too long, and I hope the video, which I've linked in the description, helps. It really is a wide open. It's also a harmonic oscillator in its Easter egg mode, which is interesting. You get kind of six.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
6 partials or harmonics to play with, which is a very nice bonus.
So talking of oscillators, there's actually a question in the chat to you, Chris, about if you ever use the Zeta as an oscillator. Because Ben has done an excellent video about that.
You can. Also. I have not yet.
The thing with mine, and I know that there was a very slight revision, I think, of the boards, that they say volt per octave response is around 50 or 0.5, kind of half the internal attenuation as you're setting up your modulation. I found myself bouncing between 49, 50, 51. It wasn't exactly accurate as I got across a range. But again, it's an envelope. It's a looping envelope. I could use an unquantized sequence, which is how I work with my older Surge system, where there aren't quantizers and it doesn't respond to volt per octave. You find a way to work around it if you really want to, but it's a nice oscillator.
Yeah, I think in the case, like, for Ben and myself, for example, I think Kim's system's the same way. Well, I know, you've got the black wavetable. We already have wavetable oscillators that have had waves chosen that have been proven to be really nice to use for a voice. You can certainly repurpose ADDAR as an LFO and as a VCO, and you can do that particularly if you've got a small limited case. But those envelopes were not necessarily designed to be VCO shapes. For one, they're unipolar unless you offset them, things like that. And they'll probably be a lot noisier in general, but that doesn't mean that's bad. It's just going to be, a good tool to use if you have limited resources, but a dedicated wavetable VCO might be more immediately gratifying.
Yeah. Have any of you tried using, self-patching the Zeta a bit, modulating, the envelopes on the LFO shapes with its own shapes?
Yeah, I certainly like using them, not for audio, although that can get interesting but very noisy very quick. Using them like FM operators, where you think of them in a direct chain of, say, envelope 4 is affecting 3, which is affecting 2, which is affecting 1, and maybe 1 feeds back. And there's some really interesting, complex kind of interactions to be had, because you can play with output level on board as well, so you can already kind of attenuate things without needing too much external to it. That's one for when I kickstart my self-patched series again. Actually, that would be an interesting one. How about you, Chris?
Definitely.
Do you self-patch it ever?
I have not yet. The main thing I want to get into is just taking advantage of CVing the length of the stages, because I've been in my own compositions really using the additional voltage lines in the vector sequencer to change notes between short and long durations, a little bit like a pedal action, pedal up or pedal down on a piano. And I plan to start now doing that more with Zadar to go between like just change the duration by using another CV from the sequencer. That's kind of where my head's focused right now.
It's an interesting point to think about gate length. It's why funk and groove and feel is what it is in so many styles of music, that notes are on and off for different durations of time. And even though timing may be very rigid, techno-like, long and short notes can be a really glorious thing. And I think when people go down this route of just having ADs, I know so many people are like, I don't want ADSRs, I'm not doing an East Coast thing, I'm not playing a keyboard. It's like, but that sustain phase can make a huge difference. Or even if you're just using ADs, you could use another voltage, as you say, another lane on a vector sequencer or a voltage block or something else to lengthen that decay, give this push and pull and let things breathe. Even if the timing's very rigid, makes a big difference musically.
Yeah, changing the durations would be very human, particularly hi-hat type sounds, things like that. But as you mentioned, I like having like, does the note ring out through a decay, or do I suddenly shorten the decay as if I, raised the sustain pedal on the piano and suddenly muted that note? I was really getting into that variation.
Yeah, a very nice thing for doing that, which isn't in this case, and we can't keep questioning Chris as to why he doesn't have modules. He can't have all of them. Constantine called.
However, if you want to send them to me, I'll try them.
Constantine's calling you Chris, quote, can't have every module, Meyer. The dual ADSR from Soundforce is a very nice module for that, in that you get two full ADSRs that will cycle, that have end of outs, linear exponential response, 3 variations of time. The mid time range is based on a Juno 106, which has a linear rise and then exponential falling stages. It's just an interesting kind of tidbit. But you get CV over every stage with an attenuator. It's a very, very capable thing.
Cool.
You did a video recently on that, so I'll post that in the...
Yeah, thanks for that. Just a nice, something I've been really enjoying using. I do, of course, like 2 stages as well, but you want more stages to play with and plenty of CV. That's been really good lately.
Yeah. It's a variation. It's, again, something different than the other things I have.
Yeah.
And that's the criteria in this case. So I've looked into the future and realized I'm about to box myself into a corner. If I put in the next big module that goes here next, I'm going to have trouble reaching the bus board. So I'm going to go down to the end here and then start working my way back in. I do like ADSRs. I do play keyboards occasionally or have sustained notes. And perhaps my favorite, it's hard to say what's your favorite. Well, one of the ADSRs I love the most is the multi-mode envelope by WMD.
Yep, same for me.
The reason I like it is not only does it have all sorts of interesting ways of chaining together the stages, including a sequence where each gate goes through one stage at a time. I just like the fact that I can change the shape of every single stage from hyper log to hyper exponential and really dial in the feel of something. I spent a lot of time tweaking shapes just because that's had a little bit of feel in terms of how a drum decays, things like that.
Yeah.
You keep agreeing with me, Ben. We're supposed to be fighting each other, aren't we?
We need a rival monster case here. We need to do dueling monsters.
Yeah.
No, I agree. The WMD multimode, absolutely one of my favorites. Super snappy. You get bipolar outs as well as unipolar outs, and inverted bipolar out as well. So if you're using it to, say, envelope and synthesize your own kick, you already have an inverted envelope that is bipolar that you can then, say, put to a VCA as well and play around and start to sidechain things.
For ducking?
Yeah. It very nicely gives you all that. And yeah, the extra modes, all the varying looping modes, it CVs really well. I tend to put stepped sequences into the decay, usually. And maybe an LFO into sustain. So my general kind of level of hold, if you like, in the envelope is just kind of seesawing up and down in waves. But the actual decay is kind of jumping in an event-based manner as I'm gating the envelope. And it's
Yeah, that's a reason to get that expander, because the normal one just has a CV to control all the stages, if I remember right. Let me look at this.
No.
No, it didn't even have that. Yeah, to get the CV of the individual stages, you need the expander.
WMD had a sale on recently on these, may even still be going. I think the expander was $59, and I can't remember how much the envelope was, but I did think, ooh, do I want a row of these things? And realised I didn't. The older WMD envelope VCA is awesome too, but forgot the name. Frank in the chat. You've got the multi-mode VCA in the case as well, Chris, with saturation and all the options for kind of stereo panning and fading. I really like that too.
But what's the one thing about the multi-mode envelope that will drive you nuts?
The knobs are the wrong way around.
Right, the time knobs are backwards.
Yeah, so if you want the fastest, snappiest, instant attack, it's all the way right, not all the way left.
Yeah, there's speed rather than time.
Yeah. But you have the same issue on a function generator. You're using, say, maths or Felicity, that when they work one way as an envelope, we expect, lowest value to be instant, and we're adding time. We're making the attack longer as we turn it up. But of course, when it's then looping as an LFO, that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't as an oscillator either, because you're then turning left to take away time to go faster, to go up in pitch, which is then the opposite of what you want the looping behavior. So it's not an uncommon thing. At least in function generators, it's definitely a bit weird on the multi-mode envelope, but you get used to it.
Yeah, it'll mess you up once, and then you'll remember for the rest of the day, and then the next time you'll forget again.
Or once you've lived with this case enough, you'll stick there.
Well, that's the thing. I have so many different envelopes that work different ways. So I realize now I have three favorite ADSRs. Okay, confession, I have three favorite ADSRs. Multi-mode envelope is definitely one of them. It's one of the modules I've owned the longest. And that's something in itself that I haven't traded it or sold it already. Mm-hmm. Another multi-stage ADSR that I really like is the AGH mini mod, because it adds decay and hold segments, decay in front of the attack, hold after the attack, to the normal ADSR shape. And there's that baby.
There we go.
So it's an extremely flexible ADSR. If you only had room for one ADSR, this might be a way to go, just because it adds those additional choices of the hold and delay.
Yep. Ian in the chat that keeps saying Stages does that, Stages does that, and then told himself I'll stop promoting Stages. I think it was Ian that caught my eye. Yeah, you get whole 6-stage envelopes with Stages as well. The AGH Minimod dual contour generator, which is two more standard Minimoog style envelopes, is also very nice, and I think it's probably an underrated module in that series, because we often chase the oscillators and the filters and sometimes the character of the VCAs, but most people want an authentic Moog filter or oscillator. But the shape of how everything responds downstream is what that sum of the parts is. I often talk about my Roland SH09 like that I'm not really interested in having any of its functions as individual modules, because the sum of the parts of that thing, very basic monosynth, one LFO, one VCO, one filter, one ADSR, that's it. But I love it. I just love the sound of that thing as a whole. I'm not interested in particularly having the most authentic replication just of the filter.
Yeah, if you are a Moog fanboy, or if you wonder why they sound different than other instruments, one of the little hidden differences between envelope generators is how do they transition from attack to decay. Because if you have a perfect log or a perfect exponential shape, you will never reach your target mathematically. So each of these modules have to decide at what point in that curve do they cut it off and go to the next stage. And one of the particular things about the early Moog envelopes is they cut that attack pretty early before it had rounded up to the top, then went into decay. So it has a unique shape to it. That, like STG Sound Labs made a whole module based on how can we replicate that particular attack shape. And that's something that Alan's going to be looking at when he does his mini Moog recreation modules, is how do you get that shape. That's why the Moog envelopes do have a different sound than, say, the Roland envelopes, which go much further along the curve before they transition to the next stage.
Yep. Another very nice one that has come up in the chat as I was preparing to grab links, the AHDSR by Abstract Data, which I've just put the link in the chat. I'll put the web link to the Abstract Data page as well, and let's pull it up in the browser too. This very nice envelope, while we're on the subject. Voltage control over everything. Let's see if I can pop an image out maybe there. No, does it not want to play ball?
Yeah, I saw that when he was coming up with it. I thought, yeah, that looked like it was a really good one too.
But what's a couple of nice features that do really set it apart? We have attack, hold, decay, sustain, release. It's a nice 5-stage envelope. We have linear exponential responses, which is nice. But then we've also got this overall envelope time, the blue knob at the top right, that will just add more time to everything. So it will still retain the relative shapes of how fast and slow the attacks and decays are, but just overall add more time. And I find that super jammable to set the envelope responding how I want with that all the way left, and then ride that knob manually or with an external fader. Ride it as if I'm kind of pushing a fader but just reaching over for a knob as we go. We have CV over everything as well, near enough. And we have what I would call a mirror output as opposed to an inverted output, in that it has the inverted shape, but it's already offset back into the normal range. So it wouldn't take it wouldn't take 0 volts to 5 volts and give us 0 to -5. It would still give us 5 to 0 just in a kind of mirror flip without inverting down, which I find really handy. Because as soon as I invert an envelope, I'm usually having to offset its behavior.
Now you got me thinking I should change modules.
Watch the video, Chris. Take the bait.
That's for the next episode.
Yeah. I mean, that is something that the mini mod lacks. It does not have voltage control over the individual stages. And I just realized the multi-mode envelope from WMD does not have voltage control over the stages. It's one voltage for all of the decay times, although it does have individual stage outputs as when those stages end, as does stages, I know. But that leads up to why I got this third ADSR, the Bafaco voltage-controlled ADSR,
Yeah.
because it does give you voltage control over all of the stage durations or the sustain level, and it also has the individual trigger outs for each of those stages.
Yep. And SACE from Instruo, I believe, is based on that because the Bafaco is open source.
Ah.
Same thing. It's a very similar layout. I think same layout, potentially.
And it has a shape knob from linear through the classic log exponential shape. And that's one of the, people are asking, why don't you have mass? I do have a bone to pick that it uses the same shape for the attack and decay. And actually, they should be separate shapes. You want like a log attack and an exponential decay a lot of the time. Not always.
Yeah.
It's better for LFOs, though. What they did is better for LFO shapes, I find.
Yeah, it makes more sense looping, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So those are my 3 quote-unquote ADSRs. And then in the middle of this row is an extravagance, a bit of luxury, but also it takes me back to my roots at sequential circuits. And that is the Waldorf Mod 1, big monster envelope generator. Although it does have a couple attack decay segments on the side as well. The reason I am attracted to this is that it has individual multiple decay segments where you can go attack, decay to this level, decay to that level, decay to this other level, then sustain. Choose how many stages you go through. So you can create much more complex, like Kim mentioned earlier, horn blip types of attacks, just much more complex shapes than just a simple attack decay were there. That's why I had to have this. I wanted to have a representation of this, and I got it before I got stages. So you can just okay with the stages.
There's not any more stages, and we're already kind of having some fun with that. Thanks, Chris. Stages does that. Bafaco makes great stuff too. Keep it coming in. Keep mentioning stages.
I bought this before stages. If I gel with stages, this would have freed up a lot of HP.
Talking of envelopes, Acid Energy says, I'm just soldering a DIY kit of the FC UK, which is Frequency Central. Semvelope, the Curtis chip envelope. They're very nice 4HP envelopes, as are the System X envelopes. They were kind of known as the snappy envelope, if you like, for a very long time.
Yeah, the Curtis envelope shape is something that's classic to like the Prophet 5 and things like that. And I actually had a pair of Sequential Circuits Model 700 programmers. They're one of their early products that was meant to add programmability to a Minimoog. And they used the Curtis chip for ADSR shapes inside. And, they just have a lovely, snappy shape and sound to them.
Yeah, absolutely. If people would like to support this stream, someone did ask last time about Super Chat. I can't enable Super Chat on my channel for various reasons that will probably bore most people about the back end of YouTube. But I've put the link to patreon.com/DivKid if you want to support what I'm doing and this stream. Now, if you want to support Chris, you can go to patreon.com/Learning Modular, where there, like my channel, there's perks, there's benefits, there's access to courses. You can also head to learningmodular.com for Chris as well. And if you want to support Kim and Chris's mutual efforts, go grab Patch and Tweak. It's a very lovely book that people should have. But I've just linked the trilogy 50-page example that I will pull up for people to look at.
Yeah.
We've looked at this each episode, but when Kim told me about this, it's nice that two things. You don't have to put an email in. You can just go grab the file, which is a rare thing these days. Every free thing is behind some kind of give me your information wall. And it's not at all. You just go grab the file. 50 pages is plenty of preview as well. And it's a preview of all three books. Pedal Crush, Patch and Tweak, and Push Turn Move as well. So there's a lot to get into just in there. But just to reiterate, if you do want to support, go on to bukes.com. The link I've just posted to the free sample has everything on there. Learningmodular.com, Patreon/Learning Modular, and Patreon/DivKid. Any support is appreciated.
Yeah, and we'll throw it in early instead. I usually do at the very end of the podcast. I offer a lot of online courses, and if one of them catches your fancy, enter the code MONSTER, all caps, before the end of the month, and you'll get 25% off.
Great. I will drop that in the live chat. Monster on learningmodular.com.
Yeah. So now we have run into a small problem with threaded inserts.
Oh, come on, let's just
each
gloss
row
over
is
this.
made up of like
Gloss over it. They're perfect.
Well, I'm honest.
No, we all are. They're not perfect.
There's 3 segments of cut up threaded strips in each of these rows because they're so long. So they kind of slide and bump into each other and you have to arrange them. I have somehow moved all of these modules too far down to the right. So now I cannot get the Waldorf all of the way in. So after this is done, I'm going to go loosen up all of these screws and slide the rails around until I can move modules down that way to make room for this one.
That's far better than taking all the modules out to get a sliding nut, though.
Yes, they are the devil's spawn.
Go on, David, in the live chat. No sliding nuts. Never mind Light Bath and his biomagnet rubbish. Get Brian told if Light Bath comes knocking with that sliding nuts business. Send him my way. A lot of love for Brian. We're only joking around, of course.
When I was a kid, we didn't even have rails. It was a piece of wood that you put a wood screw into.
We need the classic Yorkshireman sketch, but for modular. If someone would like to do that, that'd be great.
So, shall we see if anything smokes?
Yeah, let's try it.
I'm running out of places to smell the smoke. So I'm going to keep an eye on the LEDs down here on the bus boards, but basically when not everyone lights up or not. I'm getting a little nervous. I don't know why. Oh, looks good. Stages did its lovely little multiple blinking start up there. Yeah, it's looking good. Let's fire. Yep, I'm firing the multi-mode envelope. Except for the one strange problem I had after the last episode, I haven't fried anything yet. But now I'm getting into some really expensive stuff to fry, so we'll see what happens.
So as we move down to the next row, and we...
Yes, we finished modulation now. So I have a row of modulation to feed upwards to all of my VCOs, VCAs, VCFs, wave shapers, etc. So the flow of this case basically starts on the lower left with all my pitch gate sources, flows up to the VCOs, flows across to the VCFs and VCAs. Now we're going to come down to the output section, which are my effects and my mixing section. And these are the sections that are in the most tumult right now, the ones that are most likely to change. Because my goal for this case has changed. Before, I thought this was either sandbox, or I was just going to make a cool patch, rip it out, and make another cool patch. I had fever dreams of taking this thing out live, make a huge patch, get someone to help me get it out of my basement here, and take it on a gig. But now I've evolved to where I'm composing, and I want to do multi-track recordings. That's going to be one of the back themes to all of this.
Yeah. David in the chat says, no internal smoke detectors. There's a module idea, Ben.
Hey, has anyone seen the ERD module that actually is voltage controlled smoke?
No.
It has a heating element that you put a little bit of piece of incense or something into, and CV over how much it heats up that element. Forget the name of it, but if you go, search for ERD smoke module, it'll turn up.
I'll post the link.
There was a breathalyzer to CV module at Superbooth a couple of years ago that
Really?
it didn't come to life. It was kind of just a joke for the event, but it did. It worked. I think it really worked.
That's interesting. Oh, did people test it live at Superbooth? Keep drinking more and seeing how it came
I
out?
think if anyone went and I'm wrong, do correct me in the chat. I think there were kind of, antibacterial wipes for the mouthpiece or varying mouthpieces, and people were trying it. I quite like the idea that over the course of a day, the patch gets increasingly, well, whatever you patch it to do, but whatever you're patching on that system gets a wider depth of modulation or more effect, or put a big slew on it. So it's kind of really a slow morphing thing across the day, as lots of people like to drink a lot at Superbooth. It would be interesting.
Even during a gig,
Yeah.
So I have modular effects, and I like modular effects, but I'd be dragged over to the dark side of having external pedals. So I need a way of interfacing to those external pedals in addition to the modular stuff. And there's several different modules available that will convert between modular levels, which are very high, and effects pedal levels, which tend to be very low. And I think you even have a diagram that shows some of that. But I've been using Please Exist from Menki again. It's transformer based, completely passive module to go up and down by a factor of actually 10. You can see actually 100, what is it? 600 to 60K. That's the ratio on the transformers. You can read on the back there.
Yeah.
And I've used this a few times to interface to pedals, and it works very, very nicely, very well. Freaking heavy though, with all these iron transformers on the back of it. But I have it on the edge of the case to make it easier to dangle the 1/4-inch cables over the side of the case to go to pedals. And because I may also be using this to interface between effects buses on an external mixer. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
Yeah. Anders says, I guess question to both Chris and myself. Do you give content in other languages on your Patreon? I certainly don't. I barely speak English. So you've no luck of getting any other language out of me. It's something I'd love to support, and we did speak, me and a couple of people, about Japanese content when it looked like I may go over to the Tokyo Festival of Modular, neither of which has happened. Do you offer any other languages, Chris, for your content?
I don't. I've looked into it because one of the things I'm doing on my training website is I'm starting to add closed captions to the courses.
Yeah.
So you get English closed captions and English transcripts that will be downloadable files you can run through Google Translate. I've looked into foreign language translations, and I have found one automated AI-based system that does it, but I have no idea how good or bad of a job it's going to do. So I might throw up some tests and have people judge whether or not it's complete nonsense and gibberish, which might have its own entertainment value, or if it's useful for me to do for other languages.
Yeah.
I tell you though, having someone, a computer or a human, trying to transcribe talking about modular synths, there's a lot of corrections involved.
Yeah, if anyone wants to watch this back in, the day after this has been online, try and put the subtitles on. See how good Google are at trying to make sense of what we're saying.
It'd probably be quite hilarious.
Yeah, on certainly my accent. Google doesn't do Bradfordian English.
Yeah. I can already see that I also have a sliding rail that's off by a half space in this row. So I'm going to have to go back tonight, loosen up a bunch of stuff and slide stuff around. So fortunately, gravity is on my side here to hold the modules in down here.
Yeah, of course.
All right, let's start plugging in some effects modules. And this is kind of an odd little collection, and it's subject to change.
Yep.
But one thing that I got based on word of mouth, because I know a few people really liked it, I got this in a trade, is the audio damage AE verb.
Yep.
Not the EOS, but the older AE verb. And this is the Mark II. Yeah, it's the Mark II module.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of percussive stuff or a lot of plucked stuff. And reverbs that sound lovely on pads can break up and splatter when you send something that has a big transient. And this is one of the better digital reverbs at taking spiky transient material and not just falling apart. So this sounded, in the demos I heard, it sounded nice on things like xylophones and stuff like that. And I got it in a trade. For trade, I got it, it's a good price on it. So I'm going to try this for a little while. It may not stay, but since I do so much plucky stuff, this was one of the better reverbs for that type of material.
It's a really good point that what you're feeding a reverb really dictates what the better choice is. The way that kind of either fake room or algorithm blooms and responds and how it reflects is a huge thing, and something you don't find on every reverb, which is a shame, is pre-delay. Being able to shift the wet thing away from you, which is kind of how far away the wall is if you're in a real room before the thing slaps back and starts to fill and diffuse. Makes a very big difference. You working with primarily ambient music, Kim, what do you do for reverb?
Yeah, I do different kinds. I also in what do you call it? In the box in Ableton Live, I use quite some reverbs, but I'd say that as you mentioned, Ben, pre-delay is a really important aspect of it to get your sound clear, I think. So that's one of the things I look into. Of course, a lot of people love the reverb on clouds, for example.
Yes.
And I use that a lot too, and I like to gate it too. So.
Well, if we're going to talk reverbs, though, this is my favorite Eurorack reverb module. And I know I will get kickback on this, and I am about to put a big Z DSP in here as well. But the Happy Nerding FX Aid just sounds freaking gorgeous, even though it's a spin chip.
Yeah.
I typically don't like the sounds of reverbs on most of the spin chip things I've heard, and I've gone through several spin chip based DSP modules. But Igor is such a great programmer. He's made these sound great. He's recreated several pedals, several classic reverbs. He's recreated immutable clouds in here. He has CV as well. The only thing I don't like is that he ships these with Davies knobs, which have large tops and are very hard. And the knobs are so crowded together, it's literally painful to adjust. So I found a bunch of these rubber knobs that are similar to what LB uses on his modules. They have a tapered top to them, and they're softer rubber. And I've retrofitted both of my FX aids, one in my live case and the one here, with these narrower knobs. And I find it easier to use, but boy, this module just sounds gorgeous. I love this thing.
Really, really great work. It's something I should be getting soon. I was chatting to Igor about that and some videos, but it just seems to do everything. His comparisons of, say, the bloom mode or the cloud mode or all these various modes in like the Strymon Big Sky, and then his comparison, they're very close. I mean, it doesn't have that. The thing with the Big Sky, and more than the Eventide space for me, which is lovely, again, everything has its space and purpose and benefit for certain projects. The Big Sky just seems to have this like transparent clarity to it that I haven't really heard in anything else. The space is maybe thicker, warmer, not necessarily lovelier in any way or more appealing, but just different. The FX Aid I don't think has that kind of like magic fly-through clarity that the Big Sky has, but it's also not a Shark processor that pulls nearly an amp of power, which is a big thing. Even in your case, you don't want a module that pulls an amp.
Yeah, that'd be kind of funny. But I also have an audio source Ventris reverb externally that I love the transparency of as well. But particularly for things like the black hole sort of effects, some of the combo reverbs he's done, like a phase shifter going into a reverb, you know, For the longest while when I was performing live, I had only 1 or 2 reverb algorithms that were like set and forget during a gig. With the effects aid is the first time I started designing what the reverb was going to be for each song I played, and with precise settings, because it became an instrument. I loved it that much.
Yeah. As you're screwing the ZDSP in, Chris, I want to crowbar in a slight sidestep to Freeze Machines by Sonic State. And what made me think of that was Kim mentioning using reverbs in Ableton Live. I don't think people realise, because I did a rather poor job of promoting it on my side, but Nick Batt at Sonic State did a very good job. So I was quite, happy to let that keep happening. I made the Freeze Machines for Sonic State, which uses all default Ableton devices. So you can buy this for £3.99, about $5.
That's pretty cheap.
If you want the effects only version, and it was Nick's idea. He came to me with an idea and I made this for him. If you want to spend £10, about $13, there's several instruments, synths that feed into a frozen reverb, but the effects only version, which Nick demos very nicely with a boom star and some other bits of kit, allows you to freeze these big glacial reverbs and play around with different sounds. So it's a nice kind of cheap way of playing with big reverb spaces, and very tonally different to the effects aid and some of what we've mentioned, but it's worth a mention, I think. But
cool.
Definitely.
To get back on track, ZDSP has just gone in the case.
Yeah, and you're responsible for me having one. I bought it while the case was disassembled. I haven't heard it yet, but you kept telling me how lovely the Valhalla reverbs were, so that's why I got and traded for this one.
Yeah, Sean Costello's work at Valhalla DSP is nothing short of stunning. His new delay for $50, I think it's $49, is an absolutely stunning bit of DSP work. Really, really impressive. But the Halls of...
I have those cards, and I have a few interesting delay cards as well.
Halls of Valhalla's lovely. Really is.
Speaking of delays, Strymon Magneto.
Just mentioned by Toilet Friend in the chat. Magneto is a tape delay
emulation.
Look how
crazy this thing is. How many boards there are in this thing.
Yeah, it's nuts.
It's deep. It requires a lot of power, but it just sounds gorgeous. Kim, I think you just got one fairly recently.
Yeah, I got one fairly recently, and it sounds amazing. It does, really. Even the spring reverb, I don't usually like spring reverb, but even the spring reverb inside it also is pretty nice. And you have this.
I'm the same as you. I like that spring reverb on the end of those delays. I used to have vintage tape delays, and just the ability to enter in all that tape damage and capstan speed warble, in addition to its lovely warm sound, is what made me fall in love with it.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, the more that I've used it, the more I've gone, what else are you going to do? Because you don't have a lot of control over like the timing of the head taps. A lot of stuff's predetermined in that regard. And I haven't really got into using it as a sample player because it does have transport controls used as a looper, etc. And it does take a lot of space. It does its one thing exceptionally well. But what's going to endanger both of these modules, the ZDSP and Magneto, is definitely the synthesis technology Hyperion processor, the 520. I've backed the Kickstarter. I am anxiously awaiting one because the demos just sound freaking lunatic. They're just fantastic.
Yeah. Couple of things ringing back. Yeah, the Magneto scanner, Robin Rimbaud, uses the sampler which does pitch shifting, reverse playback very well. That's not something I've massively explored on Magneto, but it is like a whole other second module when you get into it. More than
it does
just
great pitch shifting.
Yeah,
it does that really well.
Yeah,
that's where you get also, you get beyond the Magneto delay sound, so to speak.
Yeah.
The sound and sound looper, for example, the quantized pitch stuff. It's actually really, really fun and creative to use. You don't need to put many voices into it to get something really fantastic out of it.
It became like a cliche of how I would end songs during live gigs. It's like, lock in the Magneto with a lot of feedback and just pitch down. And it just is fantastic stuff.
Did you say the letter you pitch down? We can all do that.
But much slower with feedback and just, yeah.
Much.
It was a great way to end songs.
I'll stop being silly.
There's actually a lot of really good videos on Strymon's site about the different modes.
Yes.
I think they have some really good demos on their own side.
Yep, absolutely. It's very, very good. It was a big mainstay in my live setup that I did a couple of performances with over in the States. Which, same thing, I would live in those feedback loops. I had the DLD going into that. It's the conversation for another day, and I will link, I'll find it and drop it in the live chat in a minute, but the Esoteric Modulation podcast I do, we went through the live case, but I had this idea of a pre and post filtered effects section, and the whole send and return on my WMD performance mixer went through it. So I had reverbs and delays before an aperture, not the aperture, the stereo WMD filter. What's that one called now?
Yes, the overseer.
The overseer. So I could have delays and reverbs, and that was the DLD, so I could capture, loop, sample in that thing, and then I could filter it all down. So it was like an end of chain filter. I could drop all the high off or the low. But then after that was Magneto and the ZDSP. So then I could filter everything down, including all my dry sound, but have effects that would keep trailing on, regardless of what I was doing downstream. So you could build loops and effects and wet textures and layers that you could filter out of the way, get them living in like a Magneto kind of feedback bath, as it were, and then start to fade into this wet sound. Or before that, have it be completely dry. So as you bring the filter back up, you're bringing a new dry sound over a trailing wet sound. A really, really capable way of working. I mean, it was ridiculous. 1 of 4 rows was just the effects chain on the stereo 2 bus. But it's great. I loved it. I'll have to do some videos on that.
Yeah, I also love the overseer into 4MS DLD chain. That's what I use in my gigging case, along with an IntelliGel mix-up to do feedback and ping-ponging. I have a video on YouTube called my 3-module delay chain or whatever.
Yeah.
And to show that full setup. Yeah, I love that way of mixing together multiple modules to change the sounds.
Yep. I'm going to grab that link and drop it in the live chat right now.
Okay. So now so the effects, I don't have very many modular effects, and this is going to change, but they're chosen because, remember a couple episodes ago, I was talking about my Cadillac filters, ones that I could go to. I knew they're going to sound gorgeous. I knew they're going to behave. That's the reason the Magneto and the DSP are in here right now, is I wanted some Cadillac effects that I knew were going to be gorgeous sounding, even if they were huge, even if they were quote unquote limited. I have a couple other strange things like Effects 8 as well. But I really am looking forward to Paul Schreiber's Technologies Hyperion processor. That's going to take a significant amount of room here, and I'm going to have to rethink my effects when that comes up.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the first module, maybe the first bit of hardware. Again, live chat, let me know if I'm wrong, we'll correct that live on air. But the first bit of hardware doing spectral processing, a heavy nod to some of Michael Norris's work with his plugins, which going back, it takes me back to university using some of those spectral processes that Michael Norris did. I think they were all free plugins as well, if I remember right. And as soon as Nathan Moody heard about it and he was excited, I was like, yes, people know of this thing. It doesn't get brought up very often, but I loved running those Michael Norris plugins. Again, I'll find a link, put it in the live chat in a moment. And I would just export huge long loops of things because they'd just freely be pulling in all these spectral effects and then go back and cut it up. Almost like cutting vinyl on a hip-hop track, finding those magic moments of random spectral shifts. Really lovely. I think you're going to love that E520.
Yeah, and that's you speak of that, that's the ModBap approach of like, go ahead and jam out for 40 minutes with your modular, record it and cut it up as if you're cutting up records and put it together in hip-hop tracks. That's what Corey's really good at Beatport Tech Report, for example. It's a really fun genre.
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting way to work, considering everything as what I like to call sample fodder. We filled a balloon for my 2-year-old little girl with some dried couscous. It might have even been rice, whichever. And I was playing with it, and I was like, throwing the balloon back and forth, and I was like, it's kind of a cool, like, rubbery shaker that's got like this mid-hump to it, which is like the resonant tone of the balloon that's different to, a shaker in a can. I was like, let me grab a stereo mic and kind of shake around and have some lovely audio from that. Everything is sample fodder, and I like this idea as well of everything can be percussion. Cut the thing up, you can force that to be a short sound. Granted, usually in a DAW for me, but yeah, sample fodder, record everything, cut it later, give it to other people to cut if you're never going to use it. It's a great way to work.
Yeah, I used to be heavily into that sort of sample stuff. I was one of the people who worked on the Prophet 2000 and Sequential, and the Studio 440 sampling drum machine was my baby. And I used to be into that a lot more. But Jim Coker 512, who I play with in Meridian Alpha, he's been showing me the wonders of taking a Zoom recorder or even your phone with a nice stereo mic on it and going out in the field and recording stuff. Just bang on things and see what makes a cool sound and record it and bring it back in later on. And I also have in the closet in that hallway shelves of really primitive ethnic percussion that I would bring to live electronic gigs just for the contrasting sound compared to the really clean or common sounds we're used to hearing out of synthesizers.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you've used your Nano Garden and sampled it, Chris.
I have not sampled the Nano Garden yet, but I thoroughly enjoy playing that thing live. And we're getting into my gigging case. I have a little Folk Tech Nano Garden, which is a bunch of guitar strings attached to contact mics, going into one of his crazy DSP processors that I then process through rings in my case. And in addition to playing it, hitting it, bowing it, I started getting into like a Frippertronics type of thing where I was making really long looping delays in the DLD and then feeding more content and layering content with the Folk Tech. And that's going to become a thing in my performances in the future.
Nice.
Just a quick example of this sample fodder thing. I did a series called Self-Patched, which was literally one module, self-patched, taking one of its only output to record. So if it was modulation, like the Topo Brillo Sport modulator, ideally I would have self-patched that to modulate something. But I didn't. I just recorded it out and kind of see what happened. But the self-patched series, the Audio Damage Dimensions, which is a chorus, really kind of exploiting it, patching it back into itself, gave a really lovely reverberant tone. And again, the link is in the live chat for anyone curious. And simply taking that, dropping it into a sampler, finding what note that was, because it was just self-patched wailing on the Eurorack system, it made a beautiful polysynth. Soften the attack, let these lovely tones fade in. And it's not a sound that I would synthesize. You know, I've been synthesizing sound for a long time, but had I intently gone to make that sound, I certainly wouldn't have ended up there exactly. So I think it's really this idea of just record it all and then play around with it in other tools or bring them back into other environments is a really kind of important one for my practice.
That's a cool stuff then to bring into like one of these many fantastic granular engines on iPads or on computers. Yeah. And then just scan through it and layers and stuff like that.
Or into something like, I know you've got the Bitbox. You could build up some lovely chordal pads that way and then just bring them out as chords and have random gates trigger off and fire them off. You could just have the raw material and then use all your Eurorack filters and VCAs to reshape them instead of internal in a computer. There's lots of ways to approach audio, and that's one of my favorites. But I'm sidestepping. Let's carry on.
Shall we talk about mixing?
Yeah.
Because this is something that I've personally been undergoing a bit of angst or change over, because I originally wanted to mix this modular in itself. I really wanted to make a self-contained system. And in my gigging case, I have a WMD performance mixer with expanders to try to get enough channels. You'll see some of the mixers I'm about to put in were based on that idea. But now I've gone to the point where I'm evolving how I'm using this system to where I want to start recording multi-track performances where I want to break out all of the stems individually of my sounds, as opposed to coming up with one stereo mix that goes to the monitors or a finished piece. So I'm looking really seriously, and we'll talk about this a lot more after I get the modules in, at these external mixers that are also digital audio, multi-channel digital audio interfaces and recorders. And that's probably where I'm going next with this case. So I'm kind of moving from the modules I have here being the final mix to instead being sub-mixers that then will feed that external mixer recorder. So that's, if some of these module choices go, well, that duplicates that, or you don't have enough channels of that, or that's because I'm in transition on this right now.
How do you mix, Kim? Because you're in and out of the box.
Yeah, we discussed it a bit last time, but I usually try to mix in the box and then just bring a few, maybe 2 to 4 cables out of the box and into my sound card. It really depends. And now you also previously discussed, sample footage,
Fodder.
doing all this stuff. Yeah, whatever, footer. Yeah, food.
Fooder.
So yeah, feeding the sample
Fodder's
monster.
what you feed cattle.
Yeah. You have the advantage. I'm Danish. Well, so I mean, I find mixers in the case really convenient when you're doing that stuff because you can route stuff around to your different sample mangling devices, so to speak.
Yeah.
Just to
Alive, that's definitely what I do.
Just to pull a couple of questions from the chat. Frank says,
Sure.
Chris, what do you think of the panharmonium? Any reason not to have it in your case?
Panharmonium is pretty darn cool, and I've done a set of videos on that. That's a lot of fun. And it's currently not in the case. It is in a satellite case that might go on top of this, but I also sometimes take to play with. And Jim Coker in Meridian Alpha, our ensemble, also has a panharmonium in a little satellite case because I really enjoy processing and mangling sounds with it. It takes up a lot of HP for the way I work in this particular case, but it's a fun vacation instrument for me to like, oh, let's go process stuff and mangle stuff and things like that. So that's why it's in a satellite that gets taken out to do strange things other than my normal composing in this case.
Yeah. Another question, just to pull that one in. Of course, keep them coming. We'll keep coming back and forth. But Toilet Friend says, anyone have a solution for having too many effects and a need to send them to lots of different places? All they've found so far, is the Bafako Hex Mix, but they've got a lot more than 3 effects. Now, for me, it's usually about chaining things, this idea of series or parallel. Are there any effects that really are just on one sound? Because that can then just come through in series. Say a bass voice that has some chorus on it and nothing else is going to the chorus. I will just commit to, this is the sound I've made, I'm happy. And if I'm not, I'll have to record it again. Or as time and experience goes on, I tend to be happy with what I commit to recording-wise generally. But then 3 sends, I think about how I'm chaining them, and as long as one of the effects in a send is fully wet, so there's no dry sound building up, I will tend to build chains to do things. Like a real favourite pairing for me is the Bafako Crush Delay and the Music Thing Modular Spring Reverb, but with the digital tank, which is more like a reflective room than a real spring. So I'm very happy running them into the other. Usually the Crush Delay fully wet. This is the Crush Delay. Into the spring reverb for just a splash of kind of wetness around the echoes. That works really well. There are several other chains I like, but 3 effect sends tends to be enough. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm actually, I feel a little compromised in the live case that it has only 2 effect sends. And that's why I look at the Bafako Hex Mix and wish I could shoehorn 2 complete systems with expanders into my live case so I could have that EQ and the 3 effect sends, but that's just a trade-off. So instead, as you say, I chain stuff together. If it's going to be processed and that sound's always going to get this processed, I patch that before it hits the mixer. But I have my delay send and I have my echo send, and my echo send happens to be 4 modules now.
Yep.
Because I'm actually mixing a bit of the reverb in with the delay chain as well. So I do chain together, as you say. But also for me, it's become very important to be able to print the effects separately from the dry signal, because getting that balance right or fading the depth effect in and out is tricky to juggle live. So that's why I'm really trying to find ways of splitting out the effects returns so I can record them separately.
Yeah. I'm just putting the link in the chat for the esoteric modulation episode talking about the effects in my live system for anyone that's curious. What do you do, Kim, for kind of sends or series or parallel effects? How do you manage all that within your environment?
I seldom use send effects, only in my Ableton Live environment. So I also change stuff, but I have a switch I used recently where I can choose to route a signal to either one effect or the other effect. And I can do that for three signals. I forgot the name of the module, but it's simple switching, and I really think that's key to having some flexibility of how you route effects in a small setup. If you want to,
that's a good idea. It was like the Confusertron or something, that module, some name like that.
No, well, just a second. I'll have
There's someone
Yeah.
like Wrong or someone who makes a module that is a switch, but they've purposely misaligned things with the lines going all sorts of crazy places.
Yeah, it's wait, I'll see if I can find it. Maybe you can talk about something else, and I'll see if I can. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Yeah, I know. I'll just find it on Modular Grid. Oh.
Yeah.
I tend to forget the name of modules, but I remember how to patch them at least.
It's making those decisions. I mean, if I had 5 or 6 effects, I really start to question, for me, I don't take any of this as judgment for anyone else, but personally, I really start to question, why do I need all 5 of them to be separate? You know, if we think like short slapback delay, medium delay, and then super long feedbacking delay, and then maybe 2 different reverbs, they're all going to come down into a mix at some point, whether it's the output of the hardware or the export and render of a file in a DAW. So it's often a case of me thinking about, which of those could I chain? Can I chain them back through the mixer? I like making feedback loops around effects as well. Of course, that starts to eat channels and kind of take up more real estate. But yeah, I really question myself when I have lots of separate effects as to... Also, gelling the effects together, they can be very separate sometimes. And to try and have some cohesion, you know, if I'm using a short kind of room reverb, trying to make an electronic mix sound like a band in a room, like we're all in a small, quite tight studio space, all the other effects could feed into that, which might mean I need to set up another scent. But maybe I want my delays to sound like they're coming out of the guitarist's amp into that room, and we're all living in this space. Kind of faking an overhead on drum mixes is something I've done a long time, to build up a drum mix of electronic parts, get them into a drum bus as you would, compress, EQ, all the standard things, and then have them go out to 100% wet, very short, usually convolution reverb. So it's like the room mic on the drum kit, and then blend that back in, usually at like 20 dB or less under, but just so they're all in the same space. You can use impulse responses for cabinets to do similar things as well. If very low in the mix, everything has gone through speaker emulation, they've all got something that ties them together when they're all separate electronic parts that, you know, were never in a room audibly together. But
yeah, a lot can be said for gelling stuff together. That's a real common technique, and a really good one, to put everything in a little bit of that room. And I've been kind of evolving. I used to do like very densely layered stuff, and I like to meld stuff together by putting everything through a little bit of the same reverb. Now I'm coming for a little bit more separation and clarity. But one thing I was going to mention too, we were talking about this effects problem. Someone brought up in the last episode matrix mixers, and that would be a potential application for a matrix mixer, is to be able to take your output and splay it out across multiple effects. I've been building kind of a version of that in my own case, because I use delay quite a bit, and everything has a bit of reverb on it, but it was driving me crazy that the first sound would be dry, and then just the repeats would have the echo, when the first sound, if it was in the room, should have reverb on it as well. So I've actually have sub-mixers splitting off the reverb, so that a little bit of reverb gets on the dry sound before it even goes into the echo chain.
yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting in regards to live performance, because I've been used to performing in the Cathedral of Copenhagen, where you have a 9-second reverb. So the sounds in there, they gel by nature.
Yeah.
So it also, I think it's really crucial that you consider the environment you're actually playing in. And there might be enough reverb, or delay might be, you know, it might confuse even more to have a delay in a room that creates delay. So there are some considerations when playing live, I think.
Yeah, there was a good talk by Steve Roach after he played Phoenix, and he mentions he gets into the room he's playing in like 9 in the morning, and they spend hours for him playing with his delays and listening to how it melds with the room and deciding what delay times will or will not work in that space. Spend hours dialing that in before the performance that evening.
Yeah.
But then the room gets filled with people.
And it changes.
And then it
He
changes.
mentioned that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, one of the rooms in the funk house, they have people leave the room, so humidity in the room changes before any large recording projects. We're off on a big kind of production technique tangent, which we'll maybe save for another show. But one last thing on this tangent: have you recorded that space, Kim? Be really interesting to get a dry recording of your performance and a stereo mic'd space, ambient space as well.
Yeah, I've actually considered a lot of times doing an impulse response file from the space and actually use that for, you know, when I compose for that space. But so far I've been able to dial in via a reverb plugin that I, of course, can't remember the name of now, that I use in Ableton Live.
You managed to
It's
get quite
those
close.
The Valhalla, they also did a bigger one. What's it called?
The Valhalla, there's the Room.
Back in the days, actually.
There's the Shimmer as well, which you can turn the
Yeah, but
pitch
they
shift
did
off, which is nice.
Oh, it's not. Where is? I don't think it's this one. Let's see.
It's something, DB Powell and David in the chat, we went and recorded up Mount Rainier, in the kind of wider Seattle area, second largest mountain in the US, which I've got video of to come. And I was keen to run sound out into a guitar amp, take the recording from an amp up on the mountain. I mean, there's not much early reflection. It's a huge space. But I'll find an Instagram picture and put that up in a second. Even if we move on to talking about something else, it'll take me a minute to find. But get something on the amp, get some air moving in that space, as well as the bitterly cold wind. I definitely performed work with freezing fingers. I'll get into that another time. But also the camera mic as well, trying to capture that space and let some of that come into the final mix and try and share the experience. It made a big difference. I'll find that image because it's beautiful, but let's keep going. Mixing,
Yeah,
Chris.
for those who are into vintage electronic music albums, there's a 1970 album by Beaver and Krause called In a Wild Sanctuary that they recorded inside the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And they would do things like we now know as like, you know, the big zoom sound at the start of some movies, but on an early mode modular in this huge cathedral. And even back then it was like, wow.
Yeah, I just found the reverb plugin I use, the 2C Audio's Ether. I posted a link in the chat. It's actually really cool.
Nice. I'm going to find this picture, but let's keep going on to mixing.
So let's talk about mixers and output, and I might leave things in here loosely just so I can reach around and get to the bus board underneath here because I can't, your bus board doesn't reach down these last few inches. One of my favorite sub-mixers, particularly now that I'm doing more stereo material, and we talked a lot about stereo in the last episode, is the Happy Nerding Pan Mix. 6 channels, some of them can be stereo, and there's switches on the back to set whether or not those channels are mono or stereo. Voltage controlled over panning, voltage control over level. You get to decide which is which. There's one CVN and then a switch per channel to decide what it controls. Headphone amp built into it. And we also talked about Igor's audio design, that huge plate on the back. It's basically a printed circuit board with just using most of the copper to act as a ground shield for the more sensitive components behind it.
Nice.
There we go.
But no effects sends. That's why I cannot use it as a final mix.
Ah, okay. I found some pictures. There's me looking like a very happy camper. If it will maybe drop into Safari, I can share the image. Nope. Let me find the right one.
You're a happy camper or a frozen camper?
Both. I could cope with a cold. It was okay. Beautiful spot that David performed in as well. I will just open some new windows for this because it's well worth seeing. There we go. Okay, let's continue the conversation, but the visual beauty of Mount Rainier.
Okay. When I was considering doing my final mix in this case, the question then became, well, what's the best quality mixer? Particularly if I was going to take a performance off to 2-track. What's something that has beautiful sound, flexible with effects sends, lots of controls, and it ended up being, and let's see if I can grab all of these at once, a Frap Tools CGM system. where they basically taken each channel or each subgroup and made it a separate module. So the black knob on the far left there is a channel. The silver knob is a subgroup, which has effects ends. Then I've got 3 more black knobs, which are individual channel inputs, going to another silver knob, which is another subgroup. And then I've got the master module down here at the far right, which combines them all together. And you can mix and match these modules to create your own complex mixing board. And I've even left space in my cabling in case I wanted to add a 4th channel between these 2 subgroups. So it's a very high quality system because the folks at Frapp, particularly Antonio, are really into audio quality, but it takes a lot of power. You can see all those caps lined up at the bottom of all the modules. And it's not small and it's not inexpensive. I would definitely say this is my system. If I was going to finish in this case, it may get turned into a sub-mixer now that I'm going to be recording outside of this case. And boy, watch me be very clumsy and juggle all of these modules and cables.
I'm going to let you get a head start because I found these images. Sorry to sidestep for those more interested in the modular, but look at that. Absolutely stunning. I got to sit there and perform. We've got a few cameras, the little amp that we mic'd up, direct audio. Such a beautiful location. And then just on the corner on the way back down from there, if I just transition back across, I can add this image. That's David performing across one of the lakes, quite high up still. Really beautiful space. So there are several videos on that and another performance that I did when I was in the States. But yeah, really nice. And I've had the luxury of seeing out of the corner of my eye, you've not really struggled. They're straight in.
Well, yeah, you were cut away when I was juggling and hammering.
Yeah, it was minimal juggling. You handled that like a pro, to be fair.
Lovely space. Performing outside is great. Although it does remind me that ages ago I played, when I was in Cosmic Debris in LA, we played an outdoor rave on the mountaintop. And of course we went on like 1, 2 a.m. It was freaking cold. And our leader is a flute player. And I'm really surprised his lips did not just stick to the flute.
What's really annoying performing in the cold, I used to play in a kind of funk, hip hop, soul type band, 2 rappers, but all acoustic instruments, brass section, guitars and bass. And the brass instruments and the strung instruments, the guitar and the bass, would go in different directions of going out of tune when they were cold. Ooh. And I forget if it was that the guitars were going flat and the brass was going sharp, or the other way around. But horrible. I mean, if collectively we'd have at least got flat, it wouldn't have been too bad. For pitch to kind of go, I'm going to go up while you go down. Absolutely horrible. And that was playing on a ski slope. It was, yeah, not nice.
The things we do for our... And I bet you were paid very well for the gig as well.
No, of course we weren't.
Yeah.
But Ben, we had fun patching in the bushes.
We did.
However, that
sounds super
I just
wrong.
post a link to that video. It sounds super wrong.
Patch and tweak in the bushes. Let's find the video.
Definitely. I've already posted the link because it reminded
Folks,
me
you
of
can
that.
tell we're getting near the end because we're getting silly.
Well, not so silly. I mean, you know, but I met Kim off a slip road off the side of a motorway in the north of England, and we patched in the bushes. Or at least I did. We had a hell of a time trying to gorilla pod the cameras to the car.
Definitely.
Where is the... It was great. I'm just going to pull the image up very quickly. There we go. Look at that. Patching in the bushes. It was a nice choice of modules, actually.
Yeah, there was a little system I brought to Synthfest, right?
Mm. Yeah. But back on tangent. It's like the home run, isn't it, at this point? You've so few little spaces and gaps now, Chris. We can see the end in sight.
Yeah. So let's talk about what was my output module and now what my new output module is. When I was going to focus on using this case, maybe taking it live, I changed what output module I had in it. I had a WMD output module here for a while, Happy Nerding Out. I still use a Happy Nerding Out in my video case. I happen to really like this LADDAC out module. It has a little bit of metering, very nice little thing for level shifting. But for this case, for that purpose, I found the Basel Chow was the most flexible output module I could find. It had balanced +4 outputs. It had A and B inputs with a little bit of a Q bus. So I could go ahead and pre-cue a sound through this output module, through its headphone amp, before bringing it into the final mix that went off to the house. It's relatively small. It's an odd number of HP, which will drive some crazy, but each of these rows is 197 HP. So having one HP module in each row that's odd is fine. Super little output module.
Patching the bushes, the DivKid story. Hang on a minute. Patching in the bushes, the DivKid story. Yeah,
That's
Yes,
sample
we're gonna-
footer.
there's some sample
Are
fodder.
you still like sniffing the beer underneath your mixer that you spilled last time?
Someone said that when I
Dragon.
said in the live chat when we were kind of 10 minutes to live, going live in a minute, going to grab coffee, and someone's like, "Yeah, Ben, don't spill that." I threw half of a bottle of Hoegaarden luckily under, not on the mixer last time. No, I'm not still huffing it. That's well cleaned up.
Okay. Oh well, too bad. Now that I'm thinking about getting an external mixer for this case, one that can also record, this is a recent acquisition, like 1 week old. That's going to become my new, more or less, output module, and that's the Praxis Snake Charmer.
Yep.
8 channels to balance audio with level control on each one, off to a DB25, which I can then run into, balanced inputs onto a multi-channel mixer.
Yep.
And Ben, I think you have experience with this module, right?
Yep. That's been my output for a long time. It's been very, very quiet. I run as you say, it's a DB25. That's the output there. If I move over to Chris's screen, the kind of computer screen-esque connector there on the little expander, out to 8 XLRs into my interface, and yeah, nearly all videos. There's a Hoser one to jacks.
Yep.
Yep, nearly every video goes through it. It's very, very quiet. Very high headroom, even though it's doing balanced line level out of the module. And the LEDs in those blue knobs will go red to tell you when something downstream may clip. But the module itself, I haven't managed to clip, which has been really useful.
Yeah.
Just kind of a warning that, hey, whatever you plug into is probably going to be a bit too hot for it.
Yeah. Most operational amplifiers, op amps, a typical audio chip inside modules, clip at plus or minus 10 volts.
Yep.
Even though the power rails in a Eurorack at plus or minus 12. A few select high-end output modules use more expensive chips that will go all the way to plus or minus 12. The WMD Pro output's one of those modules. I wouldn't be surprised if this did it too. But you mentioned all those lovely LEDs. One, those higher-end op amp chips take more power. And just go look at this module on Modular Grid. Go to their website, because the amount of power it takes varies drastically depending on how many channels are blinking their LEDs. It will go from like 60 to 160 milliamps or something like that, depending on how many channels you're driving.
Yep, I will pull that up now.
Yeah, I think Praxis's website probably has the real number.
Yep. So again, just to reiterate, it's a DB25 out. It's a ribbon you can just see on the image there, out of the back of the module onto a connector for you to put a snake on to go to XLRs or jacks. And it will drive line level plus 4 dBu balanced line out of the module. Yeah, idle use is 65 milliamps on either side. Normal audio use, only 2 channels, 80 milliamps and 70 milliamps. And then normal use for all 8 audio channels, 125 to 92. And if you've maxed it all out, all LEDs lit, it's 180 milliamps.
Yeah.
So you're at...
That's a lot of power.
Yeah. But nothing I'm really plugging into it clips it. Even hot mixes out of modular, it's very rare that I get those LEDs on.
Well, that's why, it's nice to have maybe all of your modules upstream are limited to plus or minus 10 volts. But if your output module can go to plus or minus 12 volts, you know nothing in front of it's going to clip that output module.
Yep. DB Powland in the chat, David, that I said kind of enabled that whole Mount Rainier journey and getting the modular up there and powering the thing, is talking with people about powering that system. David, if you find that power that we used, because we used about an hour and a half of 12U of Eurorack and the guitar amp, and David used 7U and the amp, it was still about 65% on that battery. So we could have been up there for hours running a 12U
awesome.
modular grid. I mean, it's a bigger, heavier battery than, those USB banks that you see with very small cases. But David, if you can ping me a link on Facebook, I can pull it in the chat. Or actually, let's go better. David, if you're still there, you are now a moderator and you can share links in the live chat. So if you want to drop a link in, and David, do link to your own channel as well. There's some nice videos as well. So yeah, there we go. That's the power for that. And it looks like, Chris, talking of power, you're ready to flick this thing on.
Yes, now this is the big moment of truth, because I had already filled up this case with modules once before with brand new power supplies and bus boards and bus bars and lovely wood. And when I got about 90% full, the case would not come up anymore, because the startup surge required was higher than the power supplies could deliver. So that's why I've gone to these monstrous Acopian gold boxes, hoping that now that I have all the modules in it, which I've not tested yet, when I turn the power, that it will actually come on.
Nicholas in the live, as you do that, Nicholas in the live chat, what is the total power consumption of this monster?
It's on modular grid, and I think it's like between 8 and 9 amps on plus 12 and just under 5 amps on minus 12.
Yep, and about 141 milliamps of 5 volts. Yeah, here's the modular grid link. If you scroll underneath, you can see the power consumption. Of course, maybe not totally exact. Not every module has the correct information, but there's the link.
Yeah, the bus boards alone take over an amp just to power up because of all the filter caps on them.
But ta-da! I really kind of ruined the reveal there. I'm a very bad either beautiful assistant or rabbit in a hat.
I'm just really... you do not know how happy and relieved I am right now.
There's gaps though, Chris. Come on. I'm so upset that you've got this huge case, nearly 12 hours of streams, and there's gaps.
Yeah, I could probably slip another filter in here.
There's at least 4 octs you could put in there. Come on.
Send me one.
If I had 4, I would be sending them.
Here, I'll be raw and upfront. Send me one.
No, joking aside, do you have anything specific for those gaps? Or is part of this still, as you say, things may change, the mixing may go out to be an external mixing environment and interface?
Yeah, I'm about to buy a mixer, and if you want to talk a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about external mixers and some choices. That might be a way of wrapping up. So I'm going to add another mixer here. Use some arms that come off of the stand to hold it up, so it's kind of an L shape between the modular and the mixer. My keyboard goes here. I'm not filling this space up on purpose because I know the 520 is going, and when the synthesis technology Hyperion, and that's going to thoroughly disrupt my effects choices because it's so big on its own. This gap was taken up when I was using the AJH dual vintage filter, but I wanted to move the Nazores down here into the middle of the case. That was part of the reason the AJH got bumped and replaced with a Belgrade. So I do have room to put another filter in here, and I do have more filters. Might even be a place for me to move the FSS VAC 1 over here to get more VCAs in the middle of the case, just to control this modulation. But what I'm curious about is I'm going to leave this on for the remainder of however long we end up talking today.
Yep.
I don't have the fans turned on. It's just convective cooling right now, and I'm curious to see how hot this gets. So.
Yep. And install. I'm typing this out, but I'll just say it. Santino, as I mentioned, Doctors mentioned it's sold out. It is sold out everywhere, and response for that was really amazing. Thank you to everyone that wants one, that did support it. More stock is coming. There were delays on that, but they should be widely available for a long time once they go back out in a few weeks. and I'll be sure to post everywhere when they're available.
I have two 7 HP gaps in here. You would know.
Yeah, I bet you don't have any 7 HP blanks.
No, I guess I need some more Bastille modules then.
Or Harvestman.
There's a question in the chat about heat building.
That's actually, quickly, that's actually what this gap is for. Is I'm expecting to replace the the Erica black wavetable oscillator with a Piston Honda 3. And it's 7 HP wider than the black wavetable. That's why that gap is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, Kim, you're about to ask something.
Yeah, there was just a question about heat building up in the case. You talked about that in the first episode also.
Yeah.
But you've also considered in the placement of the oscillators, as I remember from a few episodes back.
A little bit. I mean, the main thing is, I don't know where I'm still on camera here. Let's try this. The main thing is you want the heat in your case to be stable. If the temperature inside is stable after you warm up, your oscillators and other things that are heat sensitive, like some of the linear to exponential conversions, will then be stable. What you don't want is a case where it just keeps building up heat over time. And that was the situation I was in originally with this Monster frame with its power supplies. And I put in a bunch of these SSF ventilation blanks just to create holes in the bottom and the top. And just through convection of cold air in the bottom, warm air in the top, that stabilized the temperature in the case the way that it was. Now, the second thing is you don't want it getting too hot in general, because the hotter it gets, basically the shorter the lifespan of your components. So the first goal, stable. Second goal, not too hot. I think with the convection cooling I have, with all the holes underneath here, all the holes underneath the power supply, all the holes in the back of the case, that I will get that airflow I need for it to stabilize after it's been on for a half hour or so. The next question is it going to be stable at too hot of a temperature for me to worry about the life of the components? And if so, that's when I'll start playing with the fans to see what I need to do to bring the temperature down in the case.
Yeah.
Before we get into these ideas of external mixing, it'd be a good time to do a kind of final call for chat. For general questions. There is a delay of, let's say, 20 to 60 seconds, probably variable, between what we see in the chat and what you see on our video. So bear with us and start firing any kind of final questions. We're not going to end in a minute, but good time to just call that out. One thing I'd like to share, that Phil, Blue Wolf 7, there's some great performances by Blue Wolf 7 that I will link shortly, mentioned that the ER301, the sound computer from orthogonal devices, can do a hell of a lot of what we were speaking about series and parallel and effect send routings. And now a lot of people seem to be using it as a tape looper. There's kind of models of clouds in there, granular engines. That seems like a really interesting environment for building a lot of power, certainly into a live system. Now for me, I'm just seeing brick wall learning curve, which I don't think is as bad as I think from what people have told me. But in a larger case where I have a lot of those functions covered, I don't need the learning curve, truth be told. That's the reason I haven't made the jump, but I do keep seeing people do exciting things. Have either of you thought about the ER301?
I have not, for the similar reasons as you, Ben. But Kim, you can correct me on this. When we saw Colin Benders play at the Dutch Modular Music Fest, where we released Patch and Tweak, didn't Colin have like a pair of 301s in that big case?
I'm actually not sure. I don't remember it. It was a great show, by the way. But I know one of the guys in the Danish Modular group, he has it and is very fond of it. But it's for, having a gigging case and having a lot of stuff, a very small relatively small HP. But I think it's a question of, your philosophy about being into modular. Because it's basically a whole, it can do everything, right? Almost.
I think Colin was using the ER101 sequencer and 102 expander.
That makes sense.
Yeah, he's a real kind of whiz flying around those.
I believe that.
And again, think he had a pair.
Yeah, for some reason, people ask me why I don't have like a Percussa SSP, which is a hugely powerful module. But to me, that's like having a laptop in my modular. And why don't I just use my laptop then?
Yep.
Exactly.
Hugely powerful. I know Matt Hodson that was here earlier has done some good things with the percussor. I'd certainly like to explore it. And varying different systems, I think, becomes a really intriguing thing. But in a larger system at home, I do enjoy the computer still. Modular isn't a case of I do not want to stare at a screen. I quite like just indulging 100% in the box. I don't mind integrating the two a little bit, but I tend to mainly stay one or the other, and I do still enjoy both.
Yeah.
Just to get one of the questions that we've got, Tunatic. Chris has some really cool VCOs. Curious why there's no Shipman CS8 Omega Phi 2 VCO as you have the filter. Chris,
Didn't feel a need
I can't
for it.
have every module.
I can't have every module. To me, the Shipman, I honestly, I have not looked that closely at the VCO, but my recollection was it was not that different enough from other people's offerings for me to say, gotta have this, kick something else out. Whereas the Shipman filter was a lot different than most of the other filters and seemed like it was a very luxurious Cadillac sort of filter. That's why that is in the case. But again, I can't fit everything in. I am still looking for the perfect complex oscillator. Fingers crossed that's the Frap Tools Brenso. We'll find out.
Yep. Few people say no computers for them. Yeah, totally. No judgment from any of us either way. I do appreciate if I've had a heavy day of computer, and certainly that's a big thing for a lot of people. Of I work on a computer, I don't want it to be any part of my creativity at all. I totally respect that. That tends to be why I go to the modular. But depending on where the day goes, I've been really indulging in Operator, the FM engine in the FM synth in Ableton, and using it to create full tracks, synthesizing all the percussion. There's some things I'll share on Patreon a little bit later for people that have live. You'll be able to pull the whole project up.
Yeah, I've definitely been through an evolution because, I'm old enough that I've spliced tape, with a razor. I used to play bass with a string of different effects pedals. And then I used to gig with 2 90-pound cases of outboard gear in addition to sample playback and stuff like that. Then I kind of evolved into being a computer person. I was very heavily a Pro Tools plus Ableton Live jockey for many years. And then I got out of music for a while as I had a career in video and film work. When I got back into this, part of it was an anti-computer thing. I wanted to get back into just being tactile and using a different part of my brain. But I also have made a point of using just modular for a few years because I wanted to see where the limits were for the way that I create. I wanted to push boundaries and see where I didn't like that boundary. Oh, I can push through that boundary. And I'm anticipating down the road, I will reintroduce the computer into this. I thought it was going to happen last year because I really thought my live setup was going to be Ableton Live with a push controller and a small modular case. But I was able to push my gigging case far enough that I could get everything I wanted out of it without adding live to the system. So that had a lot to do with why I haven't gone the computer route yet. Now that I'm going to start composing with this system, I'm going to push it as hard as I can. I want to get a mixer, and I've been looking at a few different models of mixer that can do recording, but also is an audio interface so that I can start massaging in the computer, send off stems to remote musicians that I collaborate with, particularly during the coronavirus lockdown. So it'll be integrated, but I want to see how much I can do in modular. That's what, the last 5 years of my life have been about. And I've been pleasantly surprised.
Yep. I'm squirreling away, replying to a couple of things. Some chat about the 301 saying that the learning curve's not bad at all. Jamie Liddell says that it really opens his modular up and the granular alone is worth it for a very, very elegant solution. I think that potentially be how I ended up using it, finding what it does very well, building a ton of in and out just for that one thing, whether it was like a complex mixing, routing, effects environment, or just a granular engine. And I'd probably live in that space for quite a long time before I moved on, because there's a lot of I/O, so it could be a hell of a granular engine, and some really nice people doing some cool granular stuff. But yeah, for me, I've just not made that leap just yet.
Yeah, speaking of granular, I'm expecting like an R bar and the 520 to be the effects that are going to replace the Strymon and the ZDSP in this case.
Yeah, those intro effects, very, very lovely.
Are they shipping widely yet? I haven't seen as many out in the wild as I expected.
first run sold out very quickly, I think, of each, and more is coming.
Okay.
I'm just getting a couple of videos. I pull up a video with Arbor and Guitar, very, very lovely granular processor. There's some really cool tricks on that with the pitch shifting, that it steps in intervals. So as you move the random pitch, you can just have it be freely like sample and hold, pitches kind of scattering around. You can have it bounce between like roots and thirds, roots and fourths, roots and fifths, roots and octaves. So you can really nicely get very musical scattering of grains. And if you're careful with it, it can kind of feel like it's in key. Of course, octaves and fifths tend to be very safe musically in most environments, but seriously cool.
Yeah, that's nice that it's integrated into it. With clouds, you'd have to like have a random voltage source or whatever, going into a quantizer with that scale or those few notes, and then patch that to the volt per octave input on clouds.
Yeah. Do keep the questions coming. I'm scanning the live chat still. I think we're up to date. If we're not, please at Kim Bjorn or at DivKid, and it highlights it a little bit for us in the chat if we've missed anything.
So I want to tap into the hive mind of the people in the chat. I'm now looking at what mixers to add onto this, and I'm probably going to get like a 12-channel-ish mixer just because it's nice and small, and that'll be about as many stems as I need. Although I want to get my voices out of here live and my effects out of here live to that mixer. I'm kind of split between the PreSonus, the Soundcraft, and the Tascam solutions. And I'm curious if anyone has any experience with any of those. I like the Soundcraft because it has the so-called British EQ, where the high end is a 12K center, the low is at 60K. I like those spread out, but actually has fewer channels and input. The PreSonus is nice because they actually do 96K recording, and Ben and I need to have an argument about that. And I've heard other people who really like the Tascam.
I think I said that it's not that. Did I say it's not that important? It's maybe not the thing I'd weight the decision on, whether it does 96K or not.
Let me at least give the case of why 96K is important, and then I'll shoot it down.
yeah. This is the thing. I didn't say. Yeah, me saying it isn't how I'd weigh the decision. For multi-tracking modular into a computer, it wouldn't have a ton of weight as to whether it was 48K or 96 for me. Recording at 96 in general, there's a much bigger argument for the higher sample rates. But do it. Fire away with the argument and the shooting down.
Yeah, so, part of my problem is that I'm old enough to have lived through early ages of computer, virtual sense to when they were bad. So I have a hangover from when things were bad. The problem with digital sampling at 44 or 48K is everyone wants to see that your frequency response goes out to 20K, but those systems cannot sample anything higher than half of their sample rate, 22K or 24K frequency-wise. Look up Nyquist theory if you want to get into that.
Yeah.
So to pull off being flat at 20K and having 144 dB or more of reject when you get to 22K or 24K is a massive filter. Multiple poles stacked up on top of each other. And in the early designs of those filters, that either meant a ton of phase shift or a huge amount of ripple in that high end. And that's why early digital audio devices were accused of being plastic, brittle, metallic, funny sounding. Is because of all the craziness going on to brick wall that cutoff. Now, so that's where I come from of, boy, if you double the sample rate, you put Nyquist way out there, you can have a very gentle slope, not as much phase shift, get it all out of the audible spectrum to knock down the digital clock noise. That all said, digital filters have certainly gotten better over the last, because it's been 50 years. And also today, most people are not listening on high-end hi-fi systems and high-end headphones. They're listening to compressed audio through headphones with emphasized frequency responses or computers with small speakers. So I agree with you, Ben, that most people are not going to hear the difference. I just have that hangover in my head of there are systemic problems with having too low of a sample rate, and you get rid of it by pushing the sample rate way out high.
Yep. Those same phase issues can be an issue when there's this idea that we should high pass everything. If it's not the kick or the bass, we should take all the low out because it's not needed. Now, of course, if you're recording a drum kit and you have a hi-hat mic and there's some weird thump off of the stand down at like 150 hertz, you don't want that on a hi-hat. There's a reason that people say to high pass everything. But phase shift is inherent in any filtering and EQing. And certainly across a stereo image, you can add some weird kind of phase skewing by just routinely high passing everything, especially when there's nothing there. I think it's White Sea Studio did a video I saw on that really went into, here's a sine wave at 1K, filtering well under 1K, but showing how actually you're changing the phase. There's no need to high pass because it's literally a 1K sine wave. But as he's kind of high passing up to say 200 hertz and back, it's phase shifting. And if that's playing against something in the stereo field, you're potentially starting to create your own phase issues. So it's an interesting point to think not only about the ranges of the systems, but as you say, to actually slope off and get that slope well out of the way of the hearing range.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I want to add on to that if you're done with that, or go ahead and finish if you have more to talk about that.
No, tag on.
One, in terms of the low frequency roll off by using a high pass filter, that will be an issue with modulars in particular, because these systems can go down to DC. And particularly if the modules are not designed exceptionally well, some of that DC voltage through envelopes are going to bleed through into the audio signal and cause you to start clipping out at rails because you've got this bleed through of your envelope on top of your audio slamming like the positive voltage rail. So that is a reason to have a little bit of low pass filter, maybe even below audibility, high pass filter, below audibility even, just to get the DC component out of the output of these beasts before you go record them or send them off to a PA. And on the high frequency end of it, I participated in some tests of designs of high-end wavetable oscillators of how high did the sample rate need to be. And I was able to show people that if your sample rate wasn't high enough, just slight changes in the pitch of the oscillator created this comb filtering effect of the final wave just because of all the phase and ripple going on right before the Nyquist point for the sample rate.
Yep, really well said.
Now, will people hear that? That's another thing.
Yeah. To pull in some questions from the chat, because it's pinging away, it's kind of running away with me here. Doc.
You asked.
Yeah, no, well, exactly. Doc New, how does the Please Exist Menke module compare with the Bastel Hendrickson?
I think the Hendrickson is actually more versatile. I think it's a fantastic little module. I like Please Exist because it's 4 channels and also magic transformers. So I was considering using it as an output stage for a while, just to have that transformer sound. But really, I like it just because it's dead simple. It's not going to break. It's not going to have a power issue. It's not going to induce hum. And it's 4 channels of the stuff. So that's why I like it. But I think the Hendrickson is actually a fantastic module for interfacing with guitar effects, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What is essential and what do you see people making mistakes with as far as first modules? What would you just keep outside the rack?
Don't go to Modular Grid and see what's one of the most popular modules. Don't listen to what everyone said is a new hot module. Think about what type of music you want to create. And start with the fundamentals, oscillators, filters, VCAs, envelopes. I really think it's useful for someone who's new to it not to get distracted by all the crazy stuff you can do in modular and start with the fundamentals of, here's how I make all this classic sounds. Now, what direction do I want to go in from this foundation? Then start looking at interesting little modules that do interesting little things. But I've seen some people build systems out of like, I've got clouds and chords and all this other stuff, and they can't make a single sound out of it because it's all disparate modules that don't work together to create the same sound, and they don't know how to make a sound in the first place. So I'm an old-fashioned eat your spinach type of person who says, learn the fundamentals and grow from there, as opposed to start with the really fancy things so you can sound just like your favorite DJ, because you're not.
Yeah. We'll keep going to rattle through it. Any one of these could be its own stream, and I'm certainly looking at starting my Patreon monthly streams again. Chris, certainly be welcome to join, as will Kim, very regularly on that. Another question, with a case that large, what's the optimal cable length or ratio of long to shorter cables?
I have not found that yet.
Just buy loads of cables. I think that's the only
You
thing.
will need more. So here's the contradiction of a case this size. On the one hand, you'll need more long cables than you expect. You'll measure from corner to corner and think that's as long as I need, but you'll need it to drape and things like that. So I have a bunch of 6-footers as well. I have extenders I can plug into the middle to put 2 cables together. Conversely, I found it also useful to have a lot of short cables. So if I am patching a bunch of small things like patching the different clock divisions into the switch down here, I don't have a bunch of 3-foot cables hanging off the case. I have a bunch of short cables keeping it in that area so I can see what's going on with the rest of the system. So I've kind of gone to the 2 extremes of short cables for local patching, then long cables for what I need to reach across the case. And I have not found the ideal ratio yet.
Yep. Acid Energy, with the lack of EQ modules, which they find quite disturbing. More on that in the future. Had Supermove happened, I may have had something, but let's move along. Little tease for everyone. What about those analog live mixers like an Allen and Heath Mix Wizard, or don't those really offer the right kind of sonic quality?
Yeah, I agree completely that EQ is an underused module inside modular because you can do so much to carve and reshape the sound. I mean, you just take any synthesizer preset and put it into a multi-band or a good few band parametric EQ, and you can come up with a dozen different useful sounds out of it. And quite often we're trying to patch the right sound when maybe a little bit of EQ would fix it. So it would be nice to have an EQ in here. And there was a time when I had, for example, an AGH finalizer in here because that added some output EQ in the system. But now that I've made this decision to go to an external mixer, I'm offboarding a lot of the EQ to that rather than having as modules in here. However, I would still highly recommend to someone who's into desktop or modular synths to get a parametric, a full multiband parametric, or even a graphic EQ, and spend a day taking your favorite patches, then seeing what you can do with it by re-EQing it, and it will completely change the way you think about making sounds.
Yep. Again, we'll keep rattling through. Quantum Space mentions that he's got 10 channels of outs with the Expert Sleepers ES8 paired with an ES6 and 3 for mixing into Bitwig. Did you consider that route, going the kind of DC coupled Expert Sleepers way into a computer?
Yes, and I have an ES8, and that was the first plan, was I'll use an ES8 to go out to live or back and forth between live. But I started doing a channel count, and I needed more channels than that, and then, yes, I can expand it. So I'm going to try this route of having a normal mixer because I have a background as a live sound mixer as well. And recording with that and having the familiar UI of a mixer and the 3-band EQ on every channel and seeing if that does it for me. Eventually, when I move into hybrid computer modular setup, I'll probably instead go to something like an ES8 or ES9 route, have multiple channels that way going straight into the computer. But right now I'm kind of leaning back on my live sound roots where I'm just really used to using a mixing console, carving things with EQ, and I'm going to try that for a while.
Yep. Given modular levels, isn't bit rate 24 or 32-bit more important than the sample rate?
No, because you should be lowering your modular level down to the level interface that your audio interface wants in the first place. If you don't, it's going to clip out. So it doesn't matter if you have 1 bit, it will be clipped.
Yeah.
And a lot of systems, you can run modular into it and try to pad it down, but you might run out of headroom. The reason I prefer 24-bit over 16 is to catch transients. I really like dynamic range. I really like to have percussive transients. To capture that, the peak of that transient, the body of your sound may be very low and level, and you'll want to have a lot of bits left over to capture that body of your sound when you've chewed up a lot of them to capture that transient. So that's why I definitely like to record 24. And also sometimes things just end up being low level. We talked a little bit prior episodes, things like the surge modules, Buchla recreations run at lower voltages. If you just run that straight into your output, it's going to be many dB quieter than the rest of your Eurorack channels. If you only have 16-bit, you might be having a lot of noise. So I definitely like to record 24-bit. And also, if you ever send something off to mastering, as if anyone bothers to master anymore, they're going to cry if you don't send them a 24-bit file.
Yeah, 24-bit's a lot of headroom, and then obviously 32-bit floating point as well, even more so.
Yeah.
Are there any changes you would make to having such a large case at first glance? Zach Roach says, been wanting to build a monster case, but keep kind of wavering in a few medium-sized cases, or to go one large case. Any instant feelings seeing this thing turned on, Chris?
Well, hi, I've got my orchestra. I've got my ultimate. I have my ultimate studio band. This is if I had assembled. This is if I was going to make a solo record and just went down the list of who are my favorite session musicians to bring into the studio and just have in the studio every time I went to record. That's my approach to this case. And there's something about being in one control. Boy, I can feel the heat coming off this. There's something about being one big control surface that makes it feel more unified to me. That's why I went this route, is I wanted to create an instrument or an orchestra. That does not mean that's the only way to go. And Ben, you're a perfect example. And Kim, you just got 5 cases built out. And Ben, you've got a lot of individual cases. I mean, do you feel it's a help or a hindrance to have your modules spread across multiple cases?
Potentially both. If I lay them out how you have, which I've certainly tried, where here are oscillators, here are filters, here are modifiers, here are VCAs, why I'll be in separate cases? Because a case of just modulation is no use. A case of just filtering is no use. But the idea of separate systems, I think, for me is quite important. The idea that, all right, I might have to move a case off the top of it, but I can go in and go, that one is this voice, or this drum machine, or this effects processing. It almost allows me to have, it's like taking the right guitar out of the rack to the gig. They're not laid out that way anymore. they're a bit of a mess, but it does allow for that. This idea that, right, that top case is, I don't know, East Coast voice. This one's kind of the West Coast thing. This is a bit surge. This is for external processing or effects within the rack. And it means I can take that to a session and do audio work that is just, that I'm going to take my effects processing rig today. It's my day. My job here is to kind of process sound. So I do like that approach as well. But any one of these questions really could kind of spiral off into mass other discussion, and we're coming up to 3 hours in, so I'll keep rattling through.
I am curious, just briefly though, like Kim has 5 cases. I'm curious how you've got your cases organized, Kim.
They're a big mess too. The most organized case I have is the 7U intelligent traveling case, because that's what I'm setting up for live gigs. But I have the same problem, or as Ben, when you distribute them, your modules over more cases, you don't have one case with just filters, for example. So it takes a bit more time, and obviously, of course, also when I see the monster behind you ready to almost eat you, it's apparent that, of course, having this whole control board of all this stuff in front of you just gets easier. So what I'm in the process of now is the cases behind me. I'm just putting it all up in one place now to see how do I use it, what do I use the most, what do I want to pull out in separate cases again, stuff like that. But it's a process like everything else. I mean, even you, Chris, say you're not done with the monster case, and you might need a mini monster, whatever,
Well, I do have 4 cases. I've got this for the studio. I do have my gigging case, which has been a very fine system for playing live. I do have a small case I use for recording my module videos. And I have a mono rocket case in the closet that whenever I'm going on vacation somewhere, I will hand select what group of modules do I feel like learning or getting more intimate with during the next week. And that's what I travel with.
Yeah,
exactly.
It came up, my local Libre maybe was the username. I didn't catch it, but I think the question generally was, be curious to know what manufacturers do actually put reverse power protection in and which don't. I'd have to go through and find them to be comprehensive. I'm sure you would as well, Chris, but wouldn't know a big list offhand.
And some have evolved. They learned to put it in later. I mean, the gold standard is ornament and crime, where you can plug it in either way and it will still work.
Is that just not more confusing, though? There's a big kind of argument, at least on Facebook. I mean, there's an argument on Facebook every second, but that actually is worse because it's telling you, hey, it's fine, plug me in either way. It's kind of steering so far from a standard that it potentially kind of makes people be a little bit loose with what they're doing with their system in general.
I think that's making up an argument that doesn't need to be made. Perhaps they should have labeled the PCB, red stripe here, and put in the manual, by the way, if you get it wrong, we've got you covered.
Yeah.
Rather than have people forming bad habits. But an ornament crime is rarely someone's first module.
No.
But like Doper tends to not have protection, at least the older Doper modules. Rossum all does have backward protection. And then I just have to go through them one by one and blow them up and figure out which ones didn't.
Jamie Liddell, which is the Hanging Out with Audio Files channel, mentions that for sample rate vids, we should all watch the Fab Filter video. If I can find that, or if you can find the recent Fab Filter video, Kim, to drop in the chat, that'd be really handy. Excellent video on digital audio.
Yeah, I don't know that one. I'll have to learn about that.
Yep. Let me keep scanning down. Again, it keeps running away with me as more comments come in where I've left the live chat, kind of goes pew. So I'm kind of trying to get back up and hey guys, I'm new at this, what should I get as a newbie? Opt1, it's a too big of a conversation. When you ask that question, and please don't take this as a judgment, because we all ask these questions, it needs a lot more intention wrapped around it. What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
What's your experience? Is modular just this fascinating new thing you found and you want to integrate it with how you work? Is it something different? There's a much, much bigger conversation to be had that we won't really have time for.
I think the general short answer I give is, are you comfortable diving into the deep end of the pool, or do you enter by the steps and go in a little bit at a time? Kim made the excellent suggestion in a prior episode that if you're new to this, you might want to start with a semi-modular, because it's going to work as soon as you turn it on and then start growing out from there. If, however, you're a deep end person, then go full modular. But maybe starting with someone's pre-configured system where someone's already figured out they're going to need one of these and two of these might be an easier way to start than just building up your own system from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it may be a different thing. For me, one of the most exciting cases, is a 6U that is my drum machine. It is everything I would want out of a drum machine, and I love it. It's 808 like, it's not exact, 909 like. There's lots of samples, there's different ways to sequence, there's different ways to get patterns going, and I love that thing. And I can see someone that's really focused and maybe has a bit more of maybe a career behind them already in a specific electronic world, that may be the right thing, this really exciting percussion thing, but they maybe already have polysynths or monosynths that they like. I mean, if I owned a Model D Minimoog, would I be trying to replicate it in Eurorack? Maybe not. If I don't, would it be exciting to rebuild in Eurorack and be able to repatch it? Absolutely. The Minimod system from AGH, once you start breaking out of what the standard Model D signal flow was, is fantastic. Audio rate PWM, AM on the VCA, there's lots that you can do. So it's too open, unfortunately, of a question. But
I'll give you an interesting aside, though, Ben, while you dig up the next few questions. When I went to put together my initial system for my first learning modular synthesis course, I wanted to make sure you could do East Coast, you could do West Coast, you could process external sounds, you could sequence inside the box, blah, blah, blah. My brother-in-law, my brother, who has a music store, said, I want to put together beginner modular systems. What's one manufacturer that makes everything in your beginning course? And I eventually figured out there was no one manufacturer that made the full breadth of modules I covered in that course. I had to go multiple vendor to do all those different things, for what it's worth.
If you can go back to power, Chris has used buses. What about going into PCB distributors? Why not wire the buses directly to the modules like a Hinton power system?
No, Hinton's is a good high-end system.
But that's different to yours. They're saying, why not go that way?
Yeah, well, part of it is that...
Just different, not a case of why not.
All of these modules already have this ribbon cable hanging off of them. You're either going to have to wire custom cables for every one of your modules to then bolt onto the Hinton bus bar system, which is a way to go and would be the ultimate in high quality. Or you have to find a good intermediary between your power distribution and what your module connects to. And that's where the bus board comes in.
Yep. MTD says, Chris, do you believe in instinct and not just being technical to get to the point of doing what you want to do?
Yeah, I believe in them both, but instinct is learned reactions.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the same on. I used to teach acoustic instruments for a long time until very recently. That was kind of my job prior to this. And people would always argue that they don't need theory or technical ability. But at a certain point, you have to be able to do what you want to execute in your head. Now, that's not to just indulge in kind of being a virtuoso player by any stretch.
yeah,
But if you don't have the muscle memory or if you think about playing fast, you might not want to be a fast drummer, but you may need to develop the fast twitch muscles to execute a musical idea at a given time. And I think you always want to be further than where you are musically. And that's an ongoing thing that I still practice
yeah.
regularly, in that I need to be able to get these ideas out. And if theory or technical proficiency helps me do so, then that's great. It can be a bit of a hurdle to get over, though, I think, especially the music theory thing. You for a while, and I
Yeah.
certainly did, you almost paint by numbers because you start to think that's what you have to do. And I think that's why people really slate music
Yeah.
theory a lot, that, no, I'm not going to learn that because I'll just end up doing what everybody does. You can get over it. And I think the same with the technical proficiency, that understanding for me AM, FM, all the audio rate modulation that isn't just frequency modulation really opened up my patching. When I'm thinking I want grit
Yeah.
and rasp and aggressiveness, but I want it to be musical and in tune, learning that sync is probably going to give me that. And maybe I want AM, where I'm playing with amplitude rather than pitch. All those kind of things really help get ideas out. Now, it's not to say I've totally
Yeah.
mastered that. It's still a practicing thing, much like listening practice and ear training. But yeah, both the kind of artistic instinct and the moment of creation and creativity, but also, yeah, having some proficiency to do it.
Yeah, my favorite quote on that came from the guitarist Robert Fripp, he can do these very intricate things and he can do punk. And he said, it's important to become a virtuoso and then let it go.
Yeah.
He says, it's important to master what your instrument can do. So it's in your back pocket to pull out when you need it. That's what instinct is. But it's important not to be bound by it. He said there's so many guitarists, for example, who need to play a virtuosic solo every time they play because that's what people expect, as opposed to instinctually saying, this piece needs this. So he said, master your instrument, put it in the back pocket, then switch over to instinct. And that's my approach to teaching modular synthesis as well. Is like, I'm going to teach you about harmonics and CV and all this jazz, just so it's in your back pocket and you understand it, and then you can be instinctual with the instrument.
A really big moment for that, and one that has turned some really great musicians I've been fortunate to be around that maybe think that they don't need any technical in their life, is when they do something in an improvised moment, and when they're technically proficient, they can recreate it. Even though it really was a kind of flow state, creative moment, something happened, something left their body, and this is what happened musically. If
Yeah.
you've nothing to pull or any kind of knowledge to pull on that, you'll struggle to recreate it generally.
And that's where the thing about modules, you can never get the same sound twice, comes from. If people don't have that ability to know what they did and recreate the sound.
Yeah, if you just patch willy-nilly, which is a funny thing sometimes, you can start to dissect it, even if you do so. I'm going to raffle through some really quickly and answer directly. Dynamis Studio, can you clock your monster case with a PC? Yes, we went through that in episode 1. Here's a way to get a stereo effect from Randy Leifer, I think it was. Apologies if any of this is wrong. Names have scanned and I'm trying to remember half the comments while scrolling up to find them. Expand a mono signal with many EQ bands, placing alternate bands onto left and right outputs. Fractals Fumana and other filter banks do that, where they take audio bands and kind of pull them onto odd and even outs.
Formus Spectral Resonator does that. The Surge harmonic equalizer, which everything's actually at sevenths, splits things into left and right interwoven channels. There's a few things that do that.
Yep. Eurorack Essentials. Hi Chris, have you tried using the wrong LRMSMSLR? For anyone that doesn't know that, the left, right, mid side, left, right.
Yeah. That module's on my wish list because it seems like you can do some pretty cool stereo imaging things with it. I definitely want to play with it. I'm fortunate to have more opportunities than time. So I have not been able to pursue every crazy idea I have, but yeah, I'm very interested in that module to do some stereo imaging, etc.
Does Chris have any drum or perk modules in his live case, or does he simply design all his own on the fly? And do you use any samples in the live case? That's from Suella, maybe. Again, sorry that flew past me. I just remember it was a question.
Yeah, we're going to have to do something on my live case. My live case is heavy on percussion modules, and if you go over to my Patreon channel, I discuss the live case in great depth as it changes. But I have like an SSF entity in there. I've got a Plonk, IntelliGel Plonk. I've got WMD Crucible, and what's the other one in there? Chimera. But then I also have like a multicolored noise source and low-pass gates. I do have a few samplers in there as well. So it is a mixture of things that give me different percussion sounds or groups of sounds, and the ability to synthesize sounds all in that case, and samples.
Someone did say, can we see the other case? There's 2 rig rundowns with Chris that I can link, or Kim can. We can put these in the comments. Anything we don't answer because the live chat's going faster than we can do it, leave a comment and we will look in the kind of coming days. Are you free?
I'll pan briefly to the gigging case. It's in disarray because I'm about to rearrange it again.
But we won't have time to fully go over. But there we go. You're effectively drummer and audio processor when you tend to play with other people, right?
Yes, I take the role of drummer when I play with others. And then also ambience beds.
There we go. The live chat's done it again, where YouTube's decided I'm too far scrolled back and just completely goes zoom to the bottom. I'm going to miss a lot. There's a lot of great questions in here, and we've been going, again, not that we need to go right this minute, but we've been going for over 3 hours again. We're now in...
And something I do for my patrons, by the way, yes, I am going to promote my Patreon channel.
So.
Treat that as my tip jar. Is I go through these broadcasts afterwards, create an index where we talk about things, and answer all the questions I can out of the chat pod for my patrons.
Yep. We'll come to a little bit of promo as we sign off, but absolutely push it. I can't enable super chat. Someone did ask last time. Patreon.com/Learning Modular and Patreon.com/DivKid. If you want to support either of us or both, it's very welcome. And Bukes for Kim and all the books as well. We'll come back to that in a second. I'm just going to do...
This metal case is getting nice and warm. It's like having a heat pack on my back.
You don't live in a cold place, though.
I do have a thermal temperature gun, and I will do measurements of how it heats up over time and things like that.
Okay, there seems to be some kind of sub-conversation going on. Kim, any questions, Kim, we've not caught that's caught your eye?
I'm not sure, no. I'm trying to answer some questions.
Yeah. Geranalog filter or Rossum Linnaeus. Chris, did you consider this when you got the Rossum?
I did not, but I love Linnaeus. And I had a hand in altering some of its features as well. But I think Linnaeus is a real underappreciated module in that it's a complex oscillator. It's a percussion sound source, and it's a stereo filter. It's amazing.
Ian C. Yoda once said, you must unlearn what you have learnt. Another good quote. Learn the rules in order to properly break them. Yep. All that kind of stuff. Yep. Someone asked me what modules are in my drum rack. That's another one for another day. I'm afraid. Not wanting to cut people off, but we will, we'll end up going 5, 6, 7 hours. If you want that specifically, if people want a kind of, this was the kind of DivKid drum case, as it were, let us know. We can discuss it. We can flip the table and Chris and Kim can question me. We could have other people on, of course. Do leave comments and let me know. It helps steer things. And again, as Chris alluded to, for the kind of additions to his Patreon, it's much easier for me to follow along to a kind of select group if you want to support on Patreon as well. I'm still scanning just for another couple of minutes.
For people who didn't catch the announcement, we are talking about a 5th episode in this series of 4, where I actually patch some of the stuff I've been talking about and demonstrate that. Don't have a hard date. We're looking at the first Saturday in May for that. We want to get past all the Superboost stuff and give me a chance to calibrate my oscillators and do all that stuff as well.
Yeah. Thomas Hacker for beginners. Robin Vincent's Molten Modular series on Molten Music Technologies YouTube channel is a good place to start, and they date back to around 2.5 years ago when he got started. Absolutely. I'll be on a live stream with Robin at 8:30 p.m. UK time tomorrow. And I had him on a Getting Started series where I interviewed him. There's a series of about only 5 episodes, which I'll re-get going at some point, restart that series. Yeah, absolutely. It was nice to see Robin kind of openly going from, hey, I'm just getting into this, to his experience building along the way. Looking forward to chatting to Robin tomorrow.
I could actually add that it's also great to follow Omri Cohen.
Absolutely.
Going from his VCV rack setup to a hybrid setup and incorporating kind of real physical modules.
7177, we need a patch demo. We'll definitely do that. We're going to do an episode which is just audio. We'll maybe talk a little less, but talk around patches and get some nice audio in there. Other than a dedicated mixer, what's a good module for panning/splitting for a stereo image? It's from Wishbone Brewery, from my neck of the woods. We'll let you go first, Chris, on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of modules that can do that. I happen to really like the, there's a couple different options out of Happy Nerding that can do that. I have his pan mix in here, but he has a smaller version of it as well. But there's a few other modules to do that. I have a Verbose scan and pan, which can also do voltage controlled panning. And for that matter, the WMD Multimode VCA does a lot of stuff, including panning. There's a lot of solutions to do that. Depends what you're doing at end of chain. I would use the pan mix, or earlier in a voice, I'd maybe use something like the Verbose or the WMD personally.
What about you, Kim? Any thoughts on that kind of mixing, panning, stereo imaging?
No, I have to say I still, the scan and pan is my favorite. That's as far as I go. I mean, I don't have a monster case. As you see, I have medium monsters in the back. So but I think that actually we talked about a bit about stereo also last time maybe. That the whole panning thing is essential for me. It's for ambient. I mean, positioning sounds in the stereo field is so important.
Yeah.
At least to me.
Been talking with Boris at Jogging House a lot about that recently. Stereo again is maybe something where my ideas and modules may lie in the future to continue teasing on this stream.
How much HP should we set aside for that?
Well, if you could set lots of HP aside, there's lots of ideas, lots in various stages. Couple of ideas not that far off, should we say. I'm not going to mention HP or anything just yet. I'm just going to be annoying and give very little. A couple of things that I just want to find. Alpha Stare mentioned that he really misses those old long podcast vids, the modular podcast that we used to do. Yeah, that stopped for various reasons. People moving, massive undertaking projects, life changes, all sorts that got in the way. But modular podcast maybe back at some point. Matthew and I are quite close together, Matthew Shaw. So it might be that we actually get together and do some videos in person. Like the Totemic Topologies interview that I did with Matthew. It was great to just go into his studio and make something of higher quality together. That might be where we take that in the future. And we seem to be getting to lots of, kind of thank yous and going to bed and all that kind of thing. So I think that's it for now.
Thank you, everyone, for hanging around for this. When Ben originally was asking me, like, how long is this going to take? I was like, well, if I was focused, I could do a module every minute. Say that I was distracted every 2 minutes. Talking maybe 4 minutes a module. Yeah, 2 hours an episode, more than enough. Ha!
But there's been a lot of knowledge shared, I think, from all three of us in this case, which have been, certainly for me, very enjoyable. And I think for everyone else, very much so too. There's been lots of very positive comments. The live chat has been super active in all the streams. When I wake up the next day, the views have been great. Really, really good. Just to reiterate.
Yeah, whenever I'm having a bad day fighting technology, I honestly open up the chat streams for one of these and just like bask in the glow of how nice everybody is. I really appreciate it.
This is the shout out for everyone in the chat.
Yeah. You rock. Perfect cut. And I'm just dropping some links in. If you want to support me, patreon.com/DivKid, patreon.com/Learning Modular, or learningmodular.com, and use the code MONSTER to get money off of an actual tutorial course. There's access to some of those.
And there's a free course up there as well.
Yeah, there's access to those through Patreon as well, and lots of other great additional posts. And Bukes.com for the books Patch and Tweak with both Chris and Kim. Of course, Push to Move and Pedal Crush as well. Can we make a no smoke module? that should be all of them if they're all right. We should all praise that all our modules are no smoke modules. I think that's everything. Let's do an absolute. If you ask a question in the next 30 seconds, we'll take it. If not, let's kind of round off and go. The streams that are coming this weekend, one thing I would like to shout out, if I just pull up my isolation streams in the browser, there is a lot more to come. The Synth Society Summit Day 1 is already underway. Beat People podcast, I think, will have gone past by now. Patch from Scratch, Valley the Architect, I think, will have gone past as well. Ali came into the chat earlier, maybe as he'd done. That was cool to see.
Ali's great.
Yeah, absolutely. The origin stories, I didn't catch the link to, but Bitwig, live performance and Simpson Eurorack, sequencing modular Eurorack and hardware, Alex from WMD. And then tomorrow in the first hour, there's a link to come, and as soon as I've got it, I will update bit.ly/Corona streams, which is also this link. I'm going to sit on a panel from Eurorack to mixing environment, which is going to be great to discuss. And Chris, at the end of the second day, the end of the Synth Society Summit, is discussing building a focused Eurorack case. So if you've had...
Yeah, if you go to Southern California Synth Society's channel on YouTube, they already have a stream set up ahead of time for each of those topics. So you can just go there and bookmark or set reminders.
Yep, this is Chris's stream for tomorrow. I've got that because I've linked it on the Corona streams list. I don't have one from mine, the late edition, yet. I will do. And then there's lots of other streams to come as well. I'll be chatting with Molten, Robin Vincent from Molten Music Tech tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. too. Great. If people can keep sharing that stream, that's super helpful as well. That resource, this idea of keeping the community together, only works if we all share it, and I keep updating it, which I am doing, and people are clearly sharing it. It's getting clicks. So I'm hoping that's becoming a really good resource for everyone to look at what's happening, schedule their own content, and just get engaged and keep supporting everyone while we're isolating. It's really important, and I think really lifting everyone how good all these streams are at the minute. One last super quick scan. Can I order patch and tweak from within the UK?
Yes, it's possible. I posted the link for those who want to find out resellers around the world. Yeah.
Yes, something like over 100 resellers now, right?
Definitely, yeah, it's amazing.
Frank mentioned when's the sound session going to be. We'll follow up with a kind of patch and sound session on the Monster. We're looking 2nd of May. We want Super Booth to get out of the way. There's a hell of a lot of content to come next week. Let that die down. So around 2 weeks, and I'll be sure to get it on the isolation live stream list, and I'll post it as well. Thanks to those saying their support on Patreon. Thanks to both of you, Chris, for the idea and willingness to do this live. It takes a lot to be doing this live. I'd certainly be very upset if I fried, not that you fried anything, but I'd be more upset if I did it live and maybe not want to take that risk. And thank you for all your knowledge along the way for both of you as well.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. I think stronger together.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.